No.
No.
It is 6:33. I'll call to order the Community and Business Relations Committee. All members attending in person. Have one agenda item this evening. Review prioritization process for staff, volunteer committees and village board. If the village manager puts through the review, please.
There was a brief memo provided in your packet. I now have in front of me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Care to elaborate on those?
So in April of 2024, there was an outline of our communication process regarding initiatives and different communication with volunteer committees and boards and the village board that was included within your packet. The time that was brought up was during some discussions on Capitol Drive and how we were going to work through that process. On June 3rd, the village board also reviewed their initiatives. Just to provide some context, we typically gather proposed initiatives, and then ultimately when that budget comes together, we then kind of allocate out which initiatives can be accomplished and those that may need to be deferred. At that time, there are a number of major capital improvements that were pending and still under discussion from the village's perspective. And so we said no new initiatives are going to come on to the table, but we're going to halt, we're going to go forward, we're going to complete the next budget. And hopefully by that time have greater clarity in terms of how we're going to proceed with some of our largest items. October 5th, we came together to review the 2025 budget outlook. And at that time discussed how the village is going to need to evaluate high impact opportunities for the immediate budget in 2025, but then moving forward, utilize this budget process as a start in being more strategic in terms of how we evaluate services, resources, and funding, so that essentially the next 20 and 25 years, we can accommodate for the increase in debt payments that we'll be taking on for the number of infrastructure improvements we have. Following this budget cycle, which doesn't conclude until the third Monday in November, once the budget is finalized, then it's my expectation that I'm going to be coming back to you based upon what's being funded and the results of that process so that we can lay out work plans for the following.
Any questions from committee members?
No questions currently.
Not right now.
So we'll open it up. I can open it up to public comment. So
Yeah, absolutely.
open up for public comment at 6:36 from anyone in the audience or anyone online. Seeing no one online.
You just want to pull one of those mics down to speak into it.
Trying to figure out what I can see at which distance might work best here. All right. Good evening. Chairman Kudo, my name's Sandy Pendleton. I live at 3529 North Frederick Avenue. I've resided in the village 35 years. Trustee McGovern, Trustee Ursink, thank you for listening to my comments tonight. I'm also chair of the village's pedestrian and bicycle safety subcommittee. As I've expressed to you all before, being a walkable and bikeable village community is Shorewood's long-term sustainable advantage. Why people would choose to come and live in Shorewood compared to deciding to move to Mequon or Fox Point or some other of our competing communities. The work that my committee does and how you interpret the village board, the work my committee does, is vital to the health and financial prosperity of the village of Shorewood going forward. So we want to attract those young, educated, talented, creative people to Shorewood that are crucial for the lifeblood and continued success and prosperity of this community. I was disappointed after the meeting on April 15th. I expressed then that the current system, in my view, is not working well. And I can say members of my committee all share that view. Some of them are not able to be with us here tonight. I was also concerned that the village manager was pronouncing a new procedure without any negotiation or discussion with this body or other citizen committees that do not have board members on them. I expressed then that I'd like to work with village manager and staff to come up with what I thought would be a better procedure, rather than the procedure that was pronounced then, that the village manager will be meeting with the chairs and the liaisons of the citizen committees on a quarterly basis to discuss initiatives and discuss staffing for initiatives. My committee has followed the procedure. In February, we prepared our annual report. We prepared our list of initiatives. And then this summer, after we discussed those initiatives further, we identified modest amounts that we are asking to be included in the 2025 village budget. $1,000 for one project, $1,000 for another project, $1,500 for another project. These, in our estimation, are important initiatives that should be done in 2025 and not 2026. As I understand where we currently stand, village manager has vetoed any consideration by this board during the budget process, August and September and October, any consideration of those proposed initiatives and requests for funds. I think that's a wrong way for the process to proceed. I don't think that's a good procedure that should be followed by this village board, by this committee, and by the citizens. Because of that, I asked that, I don't know when the next committee is 2 weeks. I asked approximately 2 weeks. I asked during that time period, we actually have a discussion with the village manager, chairs of the citizens committees, come back with a proposal as to how it would work better. So it's not a unilateral village manager veto. And then if we can come to an agreement, and I hope we can, then you all consider that proposed new procedure and approve it. If not, maybe we don't agree. Village manager comes forth with her proposed best idea for a new procedure, and we come forward with our proposal for a new idea for best procedures. That's what I thought was going to happen in April. That's what I'd like to happen now. That's what I would have hoped would have happened this summer. It hasn't so far. So those are my comments. Thank you. Take any questions if anybody had.
Any of the committee members have any questions?
Well, I'd love to hear Village Manager Ewald's sort of reaction to that.
So no differently than what's within the memo. We have a number of different projects and that are ongoing and now required of us. We have been speaking throughout this year and trying to be thoughtful and strategic in terms of how we use our resources and our staff throughout the scope of that project, or throughout the scope of these projects, because they are above and beyond what would be considered normal operations. We're going to continue to do that. I think that the major initiative that needs to take place is taking place, which is an update of our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, as well as the pedestrian and bicycle plan. That process has a significant amount of public involvement that informs a plan that should last for us at a minimum of 5 to 10 years. We completed the items on the other plan, which is why we are now back at updating the majority of the things that were on there and now updating this to really speak to the community and what they'd like to see within the scope of those documents. I'm looking forward to that coming back and being completed this fall, and then looking at that to see where, following budget approval, different areas can be incorporated.
Thank you for that.
So how does the those three requests that were mentioned by Committee Chair Pendleton, how do those fit into the budget process? If
I don't actually know which ones he's referring to, off the top of my head, and I don't have that in front of me. But I
But I'm
don't
saying
have a
how do
response
those-
with
so-
regards to those three requests.
So if there are three requests that come out of a committee and they're not going to, then they're financial in nature and they're not going to be heard until after the budget process, then how would we handle those?
Mr. Pendleton, I don't know if you'd like to share your three items.
I'll be happy.
I'm asking because they're financial resources, but there's staff resources involved
Sure.
with them.
I'll be happy to do those best I can off the top of my head. In our list of initiatives, some of them don't need any money, right? Some of them, if they're to bear fruit in 2025, they need some money. Because I certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're working on a project this fall or working on a project this spring. Let's say it's a new ordinance change, and I'm told, we couldn't possibly do a new ordinance change in 2025 because that's not in the budget. So that's why we came forward and identified the three that would need some funding and put specific amounts on them. The three are to address reckless driving in Shorewood. Very much a concern of many residents in Shorewood this year. And we have two specific ideas that we're looking at. One is to follow Milwaukee and have a impound ordinance, right? You can impound the vehicle of a reckless driver if and only if the village, the community passes an ordinance. Milwaukee we have not yet. Our committee is looking at that issue, and we think we're going to come back next year and say, this is a good idea. Okay, we want to get input from the police chief on this, of course, but we think this is a good idea. Milwaukee's done it. We should do it too. But there's probably some little expense involved with that. Having the village attorney look at the proposed ordinance. Having the village attorney, having E-Code 360 updated. I'm told that costs $50 or $100. When I asked to change the ordinance about transporting people on other bikes for about a year and a half, I was told that couldn't possibly be done because there's a $50 or $100 charge for updating 360 that isn't in our budget. Well, I don't want that to happen in this fall and this spring. So that's one, addressing reckless driving, and that's one option, impounds, which would involve some small expense. Two is we've had a number of complaints from people, especially older people, that people ride recklessly or people engage in reckless behavior with their dogs on the Oakleaf Trail. We want to put up some nice signs near the entrances to the Oakleaf Trail that provide some guidance as to proper, safe, and courteous performance on if you're going to use the Oakleaf. Right? You see these all over the country. We don't have anything like that. Our estimate is to buy a couple signs, get those posts installed. That's about $1,500. I don't think that should be put off till 2026. That should be in this year's budget so we can get that done 2025. Now I've come to the third item. I'm scratching my head to try to remember exactly what the third item was. Fortunately, there's nobody online who can remind me of that. But one was $1,500. That's the reckless driving one. And the other was the sign. That's $1,000. And the third one, I must apologize.
Okay.
Unless somebody can remember in the email that I sent
Mr. Singh?
earlier. I'm sorry, here it is. Okay, up to $1,000 to renew and update the out-of-date and American with Disabilities Act non-compliant Chapter 207. We were told before we couldn't possibly make proposed changes to Chapter 207 because the money wasn't in the budget. We think that certain portions of Chapter 207 are clearly not in compliance with American with Disabilities Act. We've been contacted by persons who are parents of disabled children who would like their children to be able to bike on Shorewood sidewalks, able to use a bicycle or a tricycle. Right now, that's illegal under the village ordinance because our ordinances say if you're 12 or under, you can bike on the sidewalk. If you're 13 or older, you cannot bike on. We think that change should be made. There's some other things, as long as we're looking at chapter 207, we would like to debate in our committee and then make a proposal to the village. Such things like, should we follow Milwaukee and allow the use of scooters? I don't have any opinion on that right now, but I've definitely heard from members in the community. Some want them, some do not. I've heard it from businesses. They'd like Milwaukee students who are thirsty and would like to bike up to an establishment and buy a drink to be able to do that via scooter. So now they can't do that. If we make that change, that would involve, if we do review of chapter 27 and we come back with some proposed changes, some proposed ordinances, I would understand the village attorney would need to look at that. That involves some expense. I don't exactly know how the village attorney is compensated, but let's say it's on an hourly basis. Let's say it's $100. Let's say he spends 5 hours looking at our proposed ordinance. That's $500. We want to make sure that's in the budget in 2025. So I don't hear, we couldn't possibly do that until 2026 or 2027 or 2028 because there's no money in the budget. Because you guys didn't come to me in the summer of 2024 and say, this is the 3 projects we want to focus on. And these are the funds that we want to make sure are in this year's budget. So I hope that answered your question. That's the 3 initiatives we've identified. And I'd like to see a better proposal so that could actually be incorporated into the process, the budgetary process, not just veto.
Okay.
What's the current enforcement on like the ADA wheels, let's say on sidewalks? I mean, are cops routinely ticketing folks in wheelchairs or tricycles?
So the person who contacted me said they haven't been contacted by the police, but they have been told, hey, you can't ride on the sidewalk with your daughter. And they would like to be able to say, no, the village changed that. We can bike on. We did ask the chief of police about this 2 years ago. Has this ordinance about riding on the sidewalk been enforced? I believe the answer was it's only been enforced in the last 10 years, 2 or 3 times. And that each of those times it was resulted in arrest for felony in possession of a gun or someone in possession of illegal narcotics. And then they also got a citation for riding on the sidewalk. The probable cause was to stop the person was they were riding on the sidewalk. And then they were cited for that, and they were also arrested for a more serious crime. And that's what we often see in other communities that enforce reckless driving laws, that in the process, or noise ordinances about cars, in the process, pulling those cars over because they ran a red light or they were excessively noisy, they find a lot of felons in possessions of guns. They find a lot of felons who have outstanding warrants. If you've read my article, how we might address reckless driving in Shorewood, you know that Elkhart, Indiana has gotten $1 million from their noise enforcement program. It's financed new police cars. It's financed new police positions. It's been a very good thing, a very popular thing amongst the citizens of Elkhart, Indiana.
Okay. So, go ahead.
No, I would just say that, if you stick around for the rest of the meeting all night long, we've got a, the main event at the end is going through high level sort of ideas that we have for generating revenue because we are coming up to a serious budget crisis. So we're going to be looking at things that we can cut here and there, very big things and minor things. So I think looking at the big picture of all of this, while we are all very supportive of these issues, and I could see some of that kind of going through and getting passed pretty easily, we're also really in a difficult situation trying to figure out our budget based on all the major infrastructure that we're doing, work that we're doing that we have to do now and we have to do in the future. And a lot of that stuff too is Downer, Oakland, which we did create, better biking routes through those streets. So we've got our eyes on the future. We're trying to work with you guys, and we're trying to work with the cyclist community, the walkers, to make this village incredibly safe for both bikers and walkers. And I think you'll see that once Oakland comes up, you'll see that in Downer. We've had these discussions. And we're always open to a lot of your suggestions. And I think, but right now we're trying to figure out, my God, what are we going to do in this village? We've got a lot of major costs that we're up against, and we've got to trim here and there. So while I see some of those things could easily get done, some might be a little bit more challenging in this upcoming budget. That's just my perspective, but I'm just
Okay.
one person.
So Trustee McGovern?
Yeah, I would just, my perspective on this is, not so much to get into the specifics of each proposal. I mean, I think we're supposed to be looking at the process for how we look at the input from citizen committees. And, I can just speak from my perspective as, I was on the Conservation Committee for 6 years, and I feel like we brought a lot of, really good suggestions to the board and the village government, and a lot of expertise on all these committees. And if we didn't have these committees, we'd probably be finding a way to create them just to supplement the work and the expertise of the staff. So, we're getting this just as information. There's not any
Right.
motion that we're supposed to vote on or anything like that. But I guess, I just kind of want to, for the record, point out, Trustee Stokebrand brought this forward to us, and, she's not here today to kind of see this through. So it might be best to just kind of put this on the back burner until, at least she or a larger group could be part of this
Yeah,
discussion.
unfortunately, she's next door in budget.
Yeah, I understand that. So, maybe we just put this off for a couple of weeks, and I don't really see any urgency on, getting
Yeah.
the report or making any change.
So, I mean, to sort of go off of your point, I think this is a question of process.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, not to set aside the $4,000, whatever it comes to, $3,500. It's a question of process, right? And it's a question of,
Right.
do the committee chairs feel like their committees are being heard, and that the quests or the expertise that exists in those committees is being brought forth in a way that is beneficial from their perspective, beneficial to the community. And if there's a budget component to it, that it happens before budgeting, so that isn't, again, talk about in 24, yet act until 26. So what I would like to do is, and I don't want to, I want to have a conversation with, village manager, and probably a conversation with a number of the committee chairs, because the other thing is, I don't know if this is a disconnect between the specific committee, if this is the general feeling of most committees, if this is, I don't want to try to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I also don't want to ignore a longstanding committee and longstanding committee chair if there really is an issue. So what I'd like to do is have a conversation with village manager Ewald, figure out from her perspective and from the village's perspective, what's working, what isn't working, where we are in the process, what things can be implemented. I know that we all recognize that there's a ton of work on staff plates. There's not a lot of money to go around on this stuff. But the committees are an integral part of what we do here and how we do it. And then obviously have a conversation with, the committee chair, Pendleton, sorry. And any other chairs that might feel, one way or the other, right? Going great, and I love it. It's not going great. This is what I would do to change it. But, I feel like it's my job, our job on this committee to sort of liaise between the community and the board. And if we need to hear directly from them, then I'm more than happy and capable of doing that. So what I would like to do is come back in a couple weeks, a month at the latest, and after having had these conversations, reconvene this committee and sort of give an update of what I've heard, where we're at. Obviously, Manager Ewald can do the same. But this is a fact-finding portion for me right now. But I would like to have answers before we get super deep into the budget, because if there are budgetary implications for these conversations, not all of them will make 25. Like, there's no guarantee that it's going to happen. But if there are things we can put in 25 that are low dollar and we think would easily pass the board, and not strain staff to the point far beyond where they are right now, then those are no brainers. But I just don't want committees to feel like they're not being heard, we're not listening, and I also don't want to feel staff to feel like, hey, we're just gonna keep piling on. So there's no motions that we can make. That's what I plan on doing. Anyone is welcome to join me in this adventure of fact finding, but that's where I'm at.
Just an item to note, we
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to come back here until at least the second meeting in October because we are scheduled for budget meetings up until that time.
We have a budget meeting prior to every board meeting.
Yeah.
Well, I will have conversation for.
Okay.
I will have
Happy to converse with
conversation
you, just wanted to
before-
let you know.
Yep, that's fine. I will have conversations with any committee chair that wants to have them. Before that, I will have a conversation with Manager Ewald. I will make sure that you guys are aware of those conversations so you can join. And any other board member that wants to join. But let's just figure out what's what and go from there.
I just want to acknowledge how frustrating it sounds like it can be from being in a group like yours that is so engaged. And I got a little off topic and into the weeds with budget and everything, but I think coming back to the root of it, it's got to be frustrating when you guys are putting so much time and energy into these groups and you feel like you're not being heard. So I think that issue alone is definitely something that I think we really care about and we want to hear more about and try to fix, because what you guys do is so important for our village and for how we make decisions. So just want you to know that.
Anything else from Manager Ewald?
No, I just look forward to also hearing what the outcome is of the updated plan, and what the sentiments are on just a number of topics that are out there.
Okay. We are over time because we are in committee of the whole. It's 7 o'clock. So, thank you very much. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee McGovern. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Aye.
I got you. We stand adjourned at 7 p.m.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting of the Committee of Whole of the Village Board of Shorewood to order. We have, let's see, everyone is present, and we have one item on the agenda this evening, which is a review of the salary survey data. Assistant Manager Chris Anderson.
Good evening. I feel like I should get a little bit closer to this.
We can actually hear you.
Oh, it's great.
The
Okay.
mics are working
deal.
wonderful tonight.
Well, outside of the notes that were circulated a little bit earlier today and the information that's available in the memo, there's not too much to add. Again, you'll note that what was collected from our 9 pure municipalities, those being Whitefish Bay, Glendale, Brown Deer, Greendale, Port Washington, Sussex, Wauwatosa, Maquon, and Cedarburg, that we found quite a bit of information out from getting the information from our pure municipalities. Noting that it was about 71% of our positions were below market. That being found out by seeing the 22 positions that were listed on the supplemental sheet that's included in the packet when we looked at the 31 total titles altogether. So in the memo, we also talk about just the ways that we could potentially try to address righting the ship. We know that in this upcoming budget, it's quite impossible to address everybody, all those positions, all 22 positions. So working with the village manager and the finance team, we came up with a way that we would potentially make a recommendation to the village board on how to move forward. And that was because we saw that some of our department heads were at the higher end of that disparity. And then knowing a couple of other factors as far as the time it would take to potentially recruit folks to fill these seats and the specialized skills, certifications, knowledge that each of these folks bring. So without repeating what's in the memo and what's in that attachment, I stand by with any additional questions that you all may have.
All right, Trustee Kudo.
When was the last time prior to 2024 that we did a salary survey?
It was last done in 2021. It should be done every 2 years. However, with the transition, me coming when I did, we are a little bit behind.
And were you able to take a look at that survey? And I wonder how they compare.
I have a graphic that I can share with you all, that it's 24 and 21 are drastically different. We did not have this many positions that were under market.
Okay. You know why we have?
I really think it's just a matter of, we just got outpaced by some other municipalities. I mean, really, in the bounce back, I could, speculate all day, but I think
Sure.
after COVID and some conversations I had with some counterparts in other municipalities, they really were trying to be responsive to what the market looks like out there, and updated their wage ranges accordingly.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been an ongoing topic of conversation at the league conferences for the past several years. Other trustee Stokbrand?
I guess it would be good also to have a historical overview of what the raises have been for the last like 5 to 10 years. I believe last year it was 3%. If I'm not mistaken, 23 was maybe 2.5 or something. I mean, just so we have an idea of, we have been looking at this regularly, and
The COLA?
yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's not just a municipality's issue. I think this issue goes across all industries.
But to be clear, this survey data is about base salary.
That's right.
So there's no COLA that would correct the gap, as it were, because it would keep.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Legally, we were not able to use any of that COVID money for salaries. Anybody?
We did not use any for salaries.
But could we have? It's water under the
Hypothetically,
bridge.
yes, at the beginning for the first 2 years, it was heavily restricted to specific items, and then they became more lenient, but even if we did, there's no way to, it's a one-time use of a revenue. So it doesn't have an ongoing revenue source.
Right. I do want to add, in my time on the board, we have always followed the staff recommendation about.
Sikudo?
So I know this is a base salary. Do we have any comparisons or competitives, including benefits?
That wasn't requested. So if by nature of how various municipalities put all of their documentation into various sheets, it could be pulled, but my main focus was updating the wages that we had in a previous document. So I used that shell that Tyler had created and populated with the new data.
I mean, I'm just now thinking that that may have been an error on our part in hindsight, not taking a holistic look at, and this is a direction from the board, so it's obviously not staff, but not taking a holistic look at both base salary and the rest of the compensation package. Because it's, it's one thing to have a lower base salary, but a higher, competitive or better compensation package, including healthcare and what. It's an entirely different story to have low base salary and then a subpar compensation package vis-a-vis other municipalities. So again, this is no fault of staff. This is what they were directed to do, and it's a great report. I'm just wondering if we need more information in order to make an educated decision.
Yeah, I think there were some questions circulated today with Manager Ewald's responses, and so maybe that would be forthcoming pertaining to benefits, I think.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I had a day, so I was
Yeah,
checking.
No, but it made me remember, and I see you, Trustee Stokbrand, hold on. I can't remember what our practice is, but when we get those additional questions and information day of, if we can print them out and put them at our desks and then attach them to the minutes, maybe. It would just be nice to have those on the record moving forward. So, yes.
I just wanted to note too, I think we did an employee survey last year, and if I'm not mistaken, pay was the #1 issue for employees, and the second one was flexible time. Is that correct?
That's right.
Trustee Ursink, did you have a?
No, I just want to echo what Trustee Kudo was saying. I think it's really important to kind of see the bigger picture with benefits, with flex time, that sort of thing. So I'd love to see what other municipalities may be doing, with benefits compared to what our benefits are. I think that'd be helpful in kind of looking at the big picture.
Just to, not to push back too much here, but I mean, I think there's no substitute for base pay. I mean, benefits differences are small percentages from one place to another. Even places that have not very good benefits, it's still within a range that's close to somebody who has great benefits. And I've worked places that have had both sides of that. And I mean, there's no substitute for base pay. I mean, if that's what needs to go up, that's, I don't want to stop that process at all.
That's a good clarification. I think these are really great, sort of from a holistic lens, but if it's looking for a way to not address the gap that we're in, then
Yeah.
we won't be doing our job, which I don't hear that.
Yeah, no, that was
Yeah.
not at all
No,
my
I just-
intention.
Mhm,
I think it's vital information to have,
mhm.
because if it is also low,
Right,
then that's an additional problem that we need to address.
correct. So what I hear you saying is take this opportunity to make sure that we're looking at this holistically. It also occurs to me that maybe it would be, I mean, I really think that before, what's her name, Christine, our new financial, Christina, when she remarked about market and the, professional labor market and where we sit and how we are structurally at a crossroads. I really feel like that was the first time in quite a while, like recent memory, that we had someone talking from a, big picture view about where we sat. And it might be beneficial to this board to have just sort of a 101 around compensation and sort of what are the different components, because we do tend to look at them fragmented, right? It's usually at the point of budget when the healthcare costs come back in and they're super high and we're looking to whittle them down. And I'm just going from my experience on the board, and that, we have sort of big picture 101 discussions about streetlights or, other kinds of infrastructure, but we don't do that necessarily around employee compensation and benefits, salary and things like that. So I don't know what that might look like, and I'm happy to talk about it more, but that's just a thought that I'm having, just so that we're all working from the same place. Because some of us have, experience in that realm and some of us don't, right? Trustee Ursink.
Is this something we'll be looking at here in the 2025 budget? Or can we look at it in the 2025 budget?
The compensation analysis?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so the proposal is to look at the 5 highlighted positions as part of the 2025 budget to address, and then kind of work through the other gaps that we see in terms of parity in
Correct.
2025 and 26 in preparation for 26, right? Okay. Is there anything you need from us in particular this evening?
I think these additional questions have been really helpful. I was really glad to get that email a little bit earlier because I agree with you, Trustee Kudo. Looking at it holistically, it's not the same
Yeah.
picture, but again, starting with the base is a good start.
And I think that graphic that you mentioned between, I'm really glad you
Oh,
asked
for
that question
21, yeah,
about
of
the
course.
21 study.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a continuing issue, or like you said, has it gotten worse? So looking at the differences in this particular graph, I'm wondering, so for instance, the senior library clerk, the librarian, I mean, the differences are higher than some of the ones that have been highlighted. Are they not highlighted because they're easier to hire, basically? If we're going strictly by the ones that are sort of the worst, right? Assistant library director.
Sure.
There are 3 that I see right here that are at or past where the highlighted ones are. I'm wondering why why they're not highlighted or what
Right.
the thought was behind that.
The strategy for picking ultimately the five was to first look at, I mean, I ranked what these differences were based on a percent away from the average, the percent away from the mean. So
Mhm.
we started with that, ranked, or not ranked, but put those in that order so we could see where the highest disparities were. And then the second factor was to what we have in the memo, considering time to hire, time to get the position posted, and whenever we're looking for replacements, if we needed to for each of these roles, we gave a ranking order from what our collective experience was based on what we thought it would take to recruit for
Sure.
a replacement, basically.
When I look at these and I look at some of the additional higher ones, and then when I say higher, I mean larger differences
Yep.
in the red column. They're all in the library. And so
I'm sorry, they're all what?
the library located within library staff. And so as not only a trustee, but also a member of the library board, I would be interested in trying to spread it a little bit into the library to make sure that they're not falling behind at a higher rate than some of our other staff. But again, all for talking about during budget.
Yes.
Can you remind me, were these numbers just from Glendale or were there what other communities were factors into
Oh,
this?
the nine
9 communities,
municipalities, that's
9
right.
municipalities. Are they listed somewhere in this memo?
It's not in the memo, but I'm happy to just repeat it for you real quick. I got that from, it's Whitefish Bay, Glendale, Brown Deer, Greendale, Fort Washington, Sussex, Wauwatosa, Macwan, and Cedarburg.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
I would be interested in looking at some of the raw data if you haven't, just I'm
Sure.
sure I'm sure that you do. Just because I wouldn't mind nerding out on something that isn't my day job. So looking at some raw data, I would appreciate looking at the comparisons, and then specifically as President McKay said, looking at the comparison between 2021 and 2024, just to see what's what. Please.
Yes.
I do believe that the health insurance costs went up 7 or 8 at least percent last. And I don't know, I guess that's what I would like to know. That's obviously the portion that we paid, because I was looking at the budget figures, right? I guess so the question would be, what did it go up overall and how much of it did the village take? And how much did, the portion, what was the percentage increase for the employees? The pension here is all state pension. So there's nothing we can do, is that correct, about giving anybody a better, bigger pension? Because everybody's WRS? So
Everyone's
that's
in
like
WRS.
really out of our hands.
Where WRS sets the contribution. rate.
So it's down to pay time off, which we adjusted last year. Health insurance and dental. Those are the 4 levers we can.
Those are the 4 components of benefits of compensation, right?
Obviously, time off is.
Right. So only one of those addresses salary base, but the others address other.
Dental and health.
Right.
Dental health and base pay or pay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, hearing nothing else, I would in general, I'm hearing receptivity from the board and a general concern about doing what's right, and eager to get more information to make that decision when we are asked to do so. So with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Motion by Kudo, seconded by trustee Stokebrand. Any objections? Hearing none, we stand adjourned at 7:20 p.m. We have a 10-minute break and then we'll convene at 7:30.
Yeah.
There were periods between 2013 and 2017 when the metering devices weren't working and there were larger events. So it's possible that there was an overflow and we just didn't know about it. And then Basin 6 is non-compliant based on MMSD flow capacity requirements. They state 22,000 gallons per acre per day of a peak flow rate. And the 2021 event, that was the largest event that we had when we did the flow metering, was 54,000 gallons per day. So almost double their allowable amount. Next slide. So just summary of the work completed in the basin, since there's been a lot of work in this basin in the past 20, 25 years. So 2001, there were some foundation drains disconnected. Is everybody familiar with the foundation drain? It's so most of the homes around here, if you don't have a sump pump in the basement, have a foundation drain. So any water that goes by the side of your foundation walls in your basement, it flows down to the bottom of your slab, and then there's pipes that are connected to the sanitary sewer system. In newer construction, there's pipes and those are connected to a sump pump crock. And then that sump pump pumps the water out onto your lawn instead of into the sanitary sewer. So disconnecting those, if there's a lot of water near the side of the house, like if downspouts aren't 10 feet away from the house and that sort of thing, that takes in quite a bit of water into the sewer system. The sanitary sewers, every sewer that isn't PVC in the basin, with the exception of one, has been lined. So that means that basically all the older original pipes have a new pipe installed inside of them. So the public portion of the main has basically been addressed. There isn't a whole lot more you can do with the public main. There's smoke testing completed in 2009. That's to try and identify sources of inflow into the sewer. So you plug manholes, you put a smoke generator into another manhole, you blow smoke into the pipes, and then you see it coming up through downspouts that are connected, or if there's big cracks in the pipe, it can even come up through the ground. So that work was completed in 2009. 2011, there's dye water flooding. That's another test to identify infiltration. I'll get into that later on in the report. As Leanne mentioned, there's private lateral lining. So 2013 and 2014 is when a bulk of it was completed in this basin, and then also 2019. In 2019, MMSD actually did a report that looked at the effectiveness of that private lateral lining. So they had done flow metering prior to 2013, and then they did flow metering after 2014. And in one of the basins where they had lined a significant number of laterals, they were able to document a 21% increase in flow. So a decent amount. Yeah, decrease in flow. I say increase, sorry. And then in the other basin, they had two basins where they metered, there were 45% of the laterals are lined, and they didn't document any noticeable or appreciative reduction in flow in that basin. And then manhole lining has been done throughout the basin for the most part. Next slide. So this figure just wanted to kind of orientate everybody on what's the village's responsibility and what's the public's. So sanitary sewer lateral maintenance responsibility, the village basically has none for the lateral. For the property owner, it's from the sewer main, which is the bigger pipe in the road, and then all the way to the house. So even the portion within the right of way is not owned by the village for sanitary lateral. Next slide. So the wet weather evaluation, I'll go through flow metering summary, dry weather flow evaluation, and wet weather flow evaluation. So flow metering summary. So that photo there, the blue box, and then with the cord on it. So that's what the flow meter looks like. That box is basically the battery, and then in all the brains of the system. And the black thing that kind of looks like a Snickers bar, that's what goes into the sewer, and that's your sensor to record the flow. So 6 of these meters were installed from September 2020 to August 21. This is something that MMSD does for all member communities. So it's actually free to the village. So it's a great deal and good to get this data. Flow meter locations, we matched them as there was flow metering completed in 2009. We tried to match those locations as best we could with our flow metering in 2020 and 2021. But because of the work that was done in 2012 and 2014, the basins were altered somewhat. So we couldn't do a complete kind of apples to apples comparison. The different colors on the map there are the different, what I called sub-basins. So we broke basin 6 up into 6 different sub-basins. And then the big red dots are where the flow meters were located. So they get installed in the pipe just next to a manhole. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide. So the dry weather flow evaluation, this is, you always kind of look at dry weather flow just to see if there's a lot. This helps determine if there's a lot of infiltration going on, even when it's not raining. So our dry weather period was November 2nd to November 6th, 2020. So we looked for a period where we had 3 days of dry weather, and then we looked at the data for the next 5 days when it was dry. So basically an 8-day dry weather period. And then we also reviewed water use data from October to December 2023, because water use you'd think would correlate pretty closely with what you would see with dry weather flow. So sub-basin 6A had the highest flow in gallons per capita per day. That's the one with the blue box around it. So the water use, the flow data is the 4th column. So it's about 126,000 gallons per day, dry weather flow. And then the water use is about 38,000. So the ratio of dry weather to water use is about 3.4. So you're seeing about 3.4 more times flow in the sewer than if the sewer was completely tight and it was just water. Some potential reasons for that. 6A is kind of the lowest point of the basin. So it could, the water's all kind of going there and slowly, trickling into the ground. It could be water main breaks in the area that's letting water in that's not metered, but getting into the pipes. 6D was the lowest, had the lowest amount of flow. That sewer is along Woodburn where there's a deep storm sewer. So the thought there is maybe that deeper storm sewer is acting kind of like a French drain. The water can go to that sewer instead of the sanitary sewer. So that's potentially why that has the lowest amount of flow. Questions in that? Okay, next slide. So the wet weather flow evaluation. So April 26, 2009 was the event that was studied in the previous study. And then we had an event on August 8th, 2021, a much more significant event. It was 3.35 inches in 1 day, which was equivalent to what's called a 25-year occurrence interval event. We didn't have like high resolution data for the April 26, 2009 event, so I couldn't correlate it to a specific recurrence interval, but it's probably on the order of like a 1-year recurrence interval event versus a 25. So the event we had was much larger than the previous event. As I mentioned before, the 2 areas were different because of those modifications in 2012 and 2014, so it wasn't a direct comparison. For the 2021 event, 6A had the highest amount of flow. So just by sheer volume, it had 3.84 million gallons a day of flow. 6F had the highest per capita flow rate. So the August 8th event is like that light blue on the right. 6F has about 119,400 gallons per day of flow. One potential reason for that is there are areas in this basin that have no storm sewer, and they do have some downspouts that go directly below grade that we suspect are directly connected to the sanitary sewer. And also having no storm sewer, there isn't, I guess, another place for water to go. So that's potentially why that basin has the highest flow. And some of that, as I'll get into, will be somewhat easier to tackle. Yeah, the rest of the data in here is just, if to get into the details of it, you can see like 6B was one of the basins where we had the lateral lining completed in 2013 and 2014. So that one actually didn't increase quite as much. It increased by about 1.5 from 40,000 to about 60,000 for these two events, where some of the other ones had much higher ratio, or it went up by 3 times or more. So it appears that the lining in 6B did have a positive impact on flows. Next slide. So comparison of wet weather flow, dry weather flow. The sub-basin 6F has the highest wet weather to dry weather peaking factor. So that was the one that had the highest per capita flow. That's the one with the downspouts some downspouts that are connected, and less storm sewer. I mean, these are all very high. So I wouldn't even say a newer development, but something like maybe post 1970, 1980, you'd expect peaking factors in about the 4 range, where these are all, 23 or higher. So there's a significant amount of flow getting into the sewer, and it makes sense. You have old pipes, you have all foundation drains for the most part. So there's a lot of way for water to get into the sanitary, and clay soils that kind of hold everything in place. Next slide. So field investigations that were completed, the village did wet weather televising on February 27th and 28th, 2023. So there was a rain event during the day. The village used their televising equipment, televised the sewers, so you're able to see some laterals had, water gushing in much more than you'd typically expect at that time of day. And then others, had a trickle, so you could identify laterals that had quite a bit more flow than you'd expect. So it's a good kind of screening method. The village doesn't have the capability to go up the lateral to see the defects, but you can at least identify what laterals are likely to have defects. Downspout dye water flooding, we did that on September 18th and 19th of last year. So I'll get into that in more details. Storm sewer dye water flooding, I'll talk more about too. And then the downspouts routed below grade in locations without storm sewer. So that photo on the left, that just shows a downspout going directly below grade and presumably into the sanitary sewer, because there isn't a storm sewer and you don't see the downspout daylight anywhere. The second photo, that's from the dyed water. That's what it looks like. You can see it in the sanitary manhole. That tells you that it's getting in from whatever test we did, if that was the dye water testing or the downspout dye water testing. And then the photo on the right, that's actually from the dye water flooding. So you can see most of the water just comes in through the joints. The gasket that's supposed to seal the pipes is failing, and the water just kind of squirts in. You can see here, and you can see how much is coming in. That adds up pretty quickly. Next slide. So wet weather televising, as I mentioned, this work was completed by the village staff with the shared televised equipment. There were 38 laterals identified that had higher flows observed, and then we're unable to televise up the laterals because of the equipment. So it's just a mainline camera. It doesn't have a camera that can shoot off into the lateral. So all the red boxes with cross hatching are the homes that were or properties identified that had potential or had higher flows. Next slide. Downspout dye water flooding. So again, this work was completed by the village staff with their shared televising equipment. The goal of this was just in the bulk of this basin, there's also a storm sewer lateral. So most of the storm sewer laterals go to those like clay pipes that stick out of the ground, and then they go underground and they go to the storm sewer where there is storm sewer. So we just wanted to verify that that was the case. So we kind of picked a home on each block. We went out to the property and we put the hose, or the village put the hose wherever they could, either at the top of the gutter or if it fit in between where the downspout makes that connection at ground and pumped dyed water in. And then you can see the top pipe, I'll go over here. Top pipe would be the storm lateral, be higher than the sanitary lateral. Supposed to go here and go into the storm sewer. But a lot of most of the time, if there are several of them, the water must be coming through from lateral and going right into the sanitary. There were cases where we saw water in the sanitary system before we saw anything in the storm system in these. So it's almost acting like a direct connection. And then with all the clay soils, that kind of helps keep everything confined. So it makes its way to the sanitary pretty quickly and pretty easily. So 17 properties we tested. There are 6 properties with defects identified in the sanitary sewer lateral. So that wasn't even what the goal was, but that just kind of came out of doing the work. It was like, holy cow, we got water already in the sanitary system. We've got nothing in the storm. And then after a while, the leak or the sanitary area would get saturated, and then you'd finally see something in the storm. So it was eye-opening. We were unable to televise up the laterals because of the equipment available though. But when we did if you go to the next slide, dye water flooding, this was completed by a contractor who had the ability to go up the lateral. So we got better idea of what these defects looked like. That's that picture there gives you an idea of how the defects are. So this work, like I said, was completed by a contractor. This goal here was to televise leaking sanitary sewer laterals. We picked areas with flatter storm sewers. Reason being, if the storm sewer's on a steep slope, you can only test the bottom portion because that's where the water will be. You won't be able to fill up the entire pipe as much. So the areas we picked were Morris, Alpine, Newhall. There are 17 sections of sewer tested, 70 sanitary sewer laterals televised, 61 laterals had visible infiltration. So they'd televise it if they saw any sort of dye water coming out of the lateral at the connection to the main. So they'd flood the storm sewer. We'd wait a little bit. They'd pump more water into the storm sewer, and then they'd run the camera down. And if they saw any water coming out of the lateral, they'd televise it. And then out of those 70 that they saw dye water, then 61 of them had visible infiltration, something equivalent to that. And then 16 breaks or cracks were identified. And like in this figure here, and kind of illustrates this is the storm sewer. So you fill it up with water. It's not going to look quite like that. Like here, goes down into the sanitary lower. And then with this, the drawback of the dye water testing is it doesn't go as far into the property. But where the storm sewer is close to the sanitary sewer, it gives you really good results. And like the other side of the street, the laterals are away from the don't get the water and get that lateral as much, so you don't get as good of data there. So that's where like the wet weather televising with a camera that goes up the sewer or up the lateral would give you the best information, because then everything's flooded at that point. But it's still, you say we got a lot of great information from it and a lot of areas that we know can be addressed. Next slide. So then the last one was just the downspouts routed below grade in locations without a storm sewer. So this is just a field survey, going out, observing the homes, and then looking for a storm sewer that's daylighted somewhere on the property. So there are 33 properties identified with 49 downspouts total. So some properties have multiple downspouts. And then the figure here, it's not easy to see, but the white boxes are the ones where there's no storm sewer and the downspouts routed below grade. The blue areas are the ones where there's no storm sewer. So that blue, the streets colored in blue, there's no storm sewer. And then white boxes would be the properties. That's it.
Without
Essentially, yeah. Because it's going, you'd have, that's, the roof is directly connected to the sanitary. So yeah, it's essentially combined. Yeah, it's supposed to be separate.
Yeah, but does that to mean that for Lake Bluff Elementary School, am I reading this correctly, that all of the runoff from the school is going to the sanitary?
No. This is,
Okay.
these would just be the gutters and downspouts for the properties that are
Okay.
white. Yeah.
Whew.
The storm sewer is disconnected, but it's not
Okay.
watertight everywhere. So it gets into the sanitary. Okay, next slide. So potential remediation and investigative activities. So downspout disconnections and locations without storm sewer. So that's just a fairly, hopefully painless one. I know it won't be painless for property owners, but there's no construction costs for the village on that. Verify with MMSD that their interceptor isn't surcharging in the Basin 6. So we asked them to put a level sensor in their interceptor. This, like I mentioned it real briefly before, this basin flows into an MMSD collector sewer essentially, and then that goes off to the treatment plant. We just want to make sure that that sewer that MMSD owns isn't backing up into the village sewer, causing the relief sewer to activate. So that level sensor will tell us that. So they've got that installed, for permanently as of now. Whenever we get heavy rain. So who knows? Could be, yeah, who knows? Hopefully, I mean, within a year, I would think we'd have an event that would, yeah. They actually are supposed to send me the data like bi-weekly. They're usually very good about it. So as soon as we have a decent event or big snow melt or something, we'll have some data. Review locations with abandoned sewers. So there are a number of laterals, mainly by where there's apartments and things where when they put the sewer in, they put a lot of stubs in, not knowing what the development was going to shake out. So just identifying which one of those are not in service and then plugging them. So we're not getting any water into the system from something that isn't needed. So that's village or contractor could do the investigative work on that. And then the cost to abandon those without excavating is approximately $1,500 per lateral. And that would be done through grouting. And that's something that is likely fundable by MMSD. When I talked to them, they didn't fully commit to it because there aren't multiple contractors that do grouting at this time. It's mainly just one contractor. So they were hesitant to say that it would be fully fundable, but they said it was likely. So that's why I had the potentially eligible for MMSD funding.
Sir, how many of those are there? Any estimate? Or-
Oh, it's in the report. I'm not,
Okay.
yeah, I'd have to look. It's in the 30 to 50 range, I think. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, 1,500 a lateral. You have 20 of them, that's 30 grand. I guess it puts you just over the threshold if it for construction project. But I mean, you can competitively bid it, and if you get one bid, you can still award it. There's nothing that says you have to get 2 bids, but they just are uncomfortable with that. So. Next slide. Sanitary lateral rehabilitation or replacement. So we have the 61 laterals identified. So as Leanne said, MMSD does not currently fund lateral lining. They had issues with it. So that is why they aren't doing it now. They may in the coming years, but they don't. As of now, they're not. Other fundable rehabilitation methods, be lateral grouting, which is kind of, I mean, you're basically grouting every single joint. These clay pipes are 3 feet long. So you have joint, and it's not very cost effective. So it's something that's been done, but not done much in the area. It's about 20,000 per lateral. Pipe bursting is another method that can be used, but it's not any cheaper. And then open cut is another method. And again, that's not any cheaper. They're all kind of in that $20,000 range, depending on length of the lateral, you know, what's in the way, what the road condition is, those sorts of things. Additional wet weather televising. This would be fundable by MMSD. It's not something that necessarily need to do until you start to address some of the laterals you already identified, unless you're going to pair it with some other program, like maybe, you know, in the future you pair it with lead service lining or something like that. Then you'd maybe investigate those sewers wherever that project is being done. Same with the downspout die water flooding. Again, potentially fundable, but you've already got quite a few identified. Foundation drain disconnection is another fundable item by MMSD. That's about $20,000 per home too. Next slide. So recommended activities, downspout disconnection, so staff time. That one, we have 0 to 12 months. So I think that would be a letter to the property owners asking them to disconnect because they shouldn't be connected directly to the sanitary sewer. Some of them may have it routed somewhere we didn't see it. So it's possible that not all of them are directly connected, but I looked as best I could and couldn't find it. An outlet to any of them. We have the verify MMSD MIS 0 to 24 months. So I would think within 24 months, we'll have a solid rain event that'll tell us if the MIS is surcharging. Surcharging just means it's backing up into the village's sewer. Review locations with abandoned sewers, staff time per location and identification, and then 1,500 per abandonment. Possible MMSD PPII 0 to 24 months. Sanitary lateral rehab or replacement. So 20,000 each, 1.2 million. That one we have over 5+ years. And then the additional wet weather televising, downspout die water. That would be, again, probably not something you'd do unless you have more areas that you're looking at for a different reason. And then foundation drain disconnection. Again, we have that at the 5+ years too. So MMSD does have their PPII funding, but it's in the, you could maybe get competitive funds to get into the 100, 200, maybe $300,000 range. And you're looking at, 15 laterals or a lot. So you can't get a lot done unless you've got, a substantial amount of money to get it done. Hopefully in the future, they'll go back to lateral lining and you can, that's more in the $5,000 to $10,000 per home range. And then you can start to really tackle them. But yeah, in the meantime, the options aren't great for replacement or aren't cheap, I guess you could say.
Trustee Kudo?
Would it be fair to say that the likelihood of the MMSD surcharging is pretty small? And that if that were the case, that would.
Yeah, it would be MMSD's responsibility. What we're going off of there is, I think either Dan, maybe you or Dave had said, yeah, when they've looked in that manhole during wet weather events and the level's been pretty high. He didn't go so far as to say it was backing up into the sewer, but he's also not standing there, when the heaviest amount's coming down and the flow's the highest.
They're literally saying there's a chance.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. Okay.
Yeah, there's a chance.
This is MMSD's problem. That'd be great.
Well, that part of it, the flows here are
Yeah.
Those
well,
all
the
those
rest of
getting
it-
to the meter. MMSD's not putting those through there.
Okay.
Trustee Ursing?
Thank you for this presentation. It's really great to kind of be much more educated on sort of the infrastructure needs of the village. One question I have is, as we look into replacing our lead laterals, how does that, affect sort of this area as we move forward? Do those things work together? Are there things we can be doing at the same time as we look to replace those lead laterals to improve this area?
Yeah, that's something I think you can get more bang for your buck out of it if you paired this with a lateral replacement, is then you're already, impacting the road, impacting curb maybe and whatnot when you're putting in the private water service. So it would be, yeah.
Just looking at a lot of the sort of the illustrations on the infrastructure underground, on page 15 of your presentation, when we replace those lead laterals, I mean, you have the illustration of cracking, a lot of crackage in pipes. Do we risk sort of damaging those pipes permanently? Because I figure they're probably in there and they're compact in there with the clay. But if we're coming through there to fix replace the lead lateral, do we risk damaging these pipes? And could that be a much bigger cost to the village?
There's always a risk of it, but I think how they replace these services is they basically pull it through the existing service that's there.
Okay.
So unless the ground, expanded significantly to damage the pipe, it could, I would say there's a greater risk of open cutting a sanitary lateral that you're going to damage the water service. Or maybe, probably not grouting or maybe pipe bursting, you could damage the water service. But yeah, I think replacing the water service, there's a very, very low chance it would impact the sanitary.
Just my final question is, if we have a home, I know we've been talking about disconnection of downspouts for a while now. What can you do as a village to compel homeowners that may not want to act on the disconnection? We run into that issue before with residents?
Basement
The
backups.
short answer is yes. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. Yes. So as you know, we have an active downspout disconnection program in our combined sewer area.
Okay.
Which is very much the same principle, right? We don't want clear water entering pipes that carry wastewater. It's designed to do that in the combined sewer area, but not sized appropriately for the type of weather events we're getting in the modern day. We don't want any clear water entering the sanitary system in the separated area. In fact, the homes who have, or by every appearance, have their downspouts connected to the sanitary sewer are in violation of the state plumbing code and the village's code. You absolutely cannot do that. So it's not really a preference question at this point. In the combined sewer area, we have recently changed the code, so we have that same issue. But prior to that, it was more of a preference issue. In certain instances, it's difficult, and it's a difficult conversation to have with people who don't want to make those changes. There most certainly will be some cases in the areas that we're talking about where the homeowner will have to make some investment in changing either their gutter system or how those downspout extensions are directed, or potentially even doing some grading work on their property. But the bottom line is that is not code acceptable. The system wasn't designed to carry that water, and we can't allow them to place that water in the system. It puts everyone in the system at risk.
Do we find them? Is it several sort of hard conversations? What?
So the plumbing inspector then handles that process. And yes, there would be, there's a process that's laid out in the code, and that does include financial deterrence.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I had a question as well about funding. Are there grant programs from, say the EPA or Inflation Reduction Act, things like that, that could cover some of this? And then my second question is, are other communities similar to Shorewood looking at the same types of expenditures?
As far as the funding question, the only funding I'm aware of is MMSD's funding for the PPII program. I'm not aware of any funding that like Shorewood would qualify for any federal funding. as far as other communities, Milwaukee is always battling it too. I'm not exactly sure what their program, TOSA. Right. Yeah, even, parts of Greenfield have issues like this that they are trying to, alleviate where they have older neighborhoods that have foundation drains. Oh yeah, you guys aren't alone. But the flows are very high. Those peaking factors are extremely high.
Trustee Stokbrand?
So just to be clear, this lateral is owned by the property owner. But these costs that the village would incur? No, these so like $20,000 for sanitary lateral rehabilitation, which I believe is line. Yeah, 61.
That's really a policy decision. It's not a discussion that we have had as a group to this point. In years past, when we did private lateral lining, the village did make a commitment at that time to utilize MMSD money, and then to make that money go as far as possible. The board at that time made a policy decision that it would match their general tax revenue, whatever funding was available to MMSD or from MMSD, excuse me, so that we could fund 100% of the costs of that lateral lining. And we would basically do twice as much as the funding granted to us would allow with that match. But again, that's a much larger policy discussion and consideration. And at the time we talked about that, nobody was talking about lead water service lines. Nobody. So yes, those the sewer laterals are entirely owned by the property owner. It's their responsibility to maintain them. The reason that municipalities have actively become a part of this conversation in recent years is that while that is true, it's the municipalities really that have to bear the brunt of the impact when that privately owned infrastructure is not maintained appropriately.
So what's the deadline?
There's no deadline.
So we're in violation of a DNR
No,
or an MMSD?
no. No.
I feel like our gallons over.
Yeah,
it's
so,
supposed to-
so we have what's called a broken sewer. It's
Okay.
broken. There's another, that's what we call it, but there's a non-compliant, excuse me. The official language is non-compliant sewer shed. And
A non-compliant water.
sewer shed. Quite frankly, that has been the case my entire tenure here in Basin 6. We've been actively working to address that, but have not successfully gotten ourselves out of that threshold of non-compliance, which means we are delivering too much water based on our population and land use. So there's no real compliance deadline, so to speak. It's just at this point. I mean, at a certain point, MMSD could take action. They've not indicated that they're going to do that, nor have I seen them do that.
Really our record of good faith efforts.
I would like to think so.
Yeah, Leanne, I guess that just came to have you seen MSD take action in related things, not the related instances of how municipalities are maintaining this infrastructure?
Not officially. I believe they probably have conversations with staff and with, higher administrative officials and perhaps even elected officials. But I'm not aware that they have unilaterally imposed sanctions or restrictions on a community.
Okay, thank you.
So I know that we're not agended for any motions or anything on this. I sort of two questions. One, when we're looking at all these different recommended activities, right, in their totality, I'm assuming the scales vary quite a bit, right? So the amount of water that we would save that would not go into the sewer is much higher if we were to rely on everything, start with a new system versus if we just had folks disconnect their downspouts? Is that inaccurate statement, or are the downspouts a major component of the problem?
I would say the downspouts are a probably moderate component of the problem in one specific sub-basin.
Okay,
The rest of the sewer shed, there's just a handful of them
Okay.
connected. So unfortunately, the downspouts are low-hanging fruit, but probably won't take out
enough.
an appreciable chunk. You know, it won't get you below the 22,000 G pad for that 3.35 inch event.
Okay, so as, this is more of a question maybe for Leanne or Art, who I see is on the line. The low hanging fruit, the connection, the downs, you know, informing folks that they need to disconnect their downspouts. What's the plan moving forward to have that happen? Just if we're trying to garner more, curry more favor with MMSD, move forward, that we're still showing efforts.
Sure.
What are those efforts?
So that's a conversation that Bart and I have not yet had.
Okay.
I think we will sit down and map out kind of an action plan as to how we go about this. There are, in addition to the funding that MMSD gives municipalities for private property I&I reduction, they also have a program called Pipe Check, which if you use MMSD certified contractors, they have scales set for, depending on the activity, you can receive a rebate of this much. So that's a conversation I would like to have with them also, to determine what, if any, parts of that program could be applied to this, so that we're providing homeowners with all of the information, all the resources that we have available to us, make this easier on them. Primarily, the reason that we're going through this tonight is we have the report. The report was funded by MMSD, so MMSD receives the report. So, you know, they're going to be saying, you know, I'm going to get phone calls, Leanne, I see this. What are you doing about this? So I want you to know that I'm going to be working these things into the DPW work plan. Obviously, the ones that require additional funding and or, you know, kind of those harder policy conversations, that's the reason for putting the time frame on these items. So we're going to be tackling the ones that we can do either with funding, so that it's a neutral cost to the village, or that it could be incorporated in the operating budget because the investigative work will come from our staff. But those items will be worked into our work plan over the next couple of years. And then as we clear some things from your deck, you know, then you can look forward to the other conversation, maybe in a couple to several years.
So it's fair to say that the number one not number one, the top recommendation on this chart of downspout disconnection, you know, time frame being 0 to 12 months. That's not anything you need policy direction on. Austin.
No.
Just going to happen.
Right, because as I mentioned, that's clear violation of village code and state
Okay.
code.
I believe where I live, that's already happened. I live in Combined.
Yep,
And so our neighborhood, we got the postcards, and you had to have your home inspected. So it's not like this has never. And I know a
correct.
friend of-
It's similar. There's some nuances that make it a little different. But the process is identical.
and maybe shouldn't say this, but if the inspector comes out and you can show them, it is possible to get a waiver.
In this case, it would not be.
Well, there's not.
Absolutely not. Cannot clear water into the sanitary system.
I just wanted to jump in on that quick if I could, because I think everyone here can sort of help message that if you have constituents that are in those combined areas that are upset about the fact that they have to disconnect, because we've already seen at the Board of Appeals level a number of requests for variances. And I've rendered the opinion that because the mandate comes from MMSD, that basically it's not a discretionary thing and the village can't just grant variances from it. It's, you know, it's different than, say, a setback, or you've got an odd shaped lot or a non-conforming lot because it's smaller than otherwise was required because it was there before the code. There's discretionary things that the village can do, but this is different. I mean, it's so, you can stress to them that it's every little bit counts. The mandate came from MMSD through, authority given to it by the state. We can't just say, well, yeah, but okay, you're going to have water in your yard, so we're just going to excuse you from it. If you look at the ordinance, it says if these conditions exist, you have to disconnect. That's it. And in the combined areas. And so the only argument we can make before the Board of Appeals is, well, they misinterpreted or misapplied the code, which is a different thing. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be people don't want to do it. But you can just help message that, hey, it's for the greater good, and it's a mandate from another municipal entity. We don't have the ability to grant variances from that.
I mean, it's a matter of, other people have done it, and I'm assuming they probably didn't want to do it, but it has to be done. So you're either up to code and good, or you're not. And it is what it is. It's not a question of policy from the village.
Well, it's a question of cost. You're gonna have to redo your rain gutters or dig up your driveway if you gotta send the water somewhere.
I get it. Sometimes it just stinks to own a home. But we can't, it's not up to us. We're just unfortunately the bearers of bad news.
So to recap, what's being presented as recommendations of next steps. Basically, the board will be engaged when there's a policy decision or a funding decision, a budget impact, and which you're not anticipating in the next 12 to 24 months necessarily, right? It sounds like what we wouldn't be engaged. However, it does sound like the main strategy at this point is to implement an enforcement initiative, what I would call enforcement initiative, where it's targeted enforcement of this ordinance based on the data that was collected, because you've identified the homes now, so you know exactly what. So, and that enforcement process is outlined in the code. I think that there are a couple things that could be helpful. So to your point, other people have done it. It's been going on for years. But I feel like anytime there's something that gets triggered by a report or new data, it can feel like a new thing, right? So I'm not suggesting that the board be involved in the communication around enforcement, but I do think that keeping us posted on the timeline of this enforcement initiative around these properties would be helpful, so that if we do get contacted by constituents, we have the information. And then an FAQ, just sort of a talking points that we can have on hand to just reinforce. Like, I'm thinking Trustee Lynn lives in Basin 6. What's that?
Disconnect when we moved in. So we just cut the gutter off and put a plastic pipe on,
Right.
and ran it onto the yard. But I also only have 2 downspouts because my house is very small. So
Yeah.
that was pretty easy.
Right. So I'm just thinking that those are 2 suggestions that I have in case this creates any kind of disruption in people's lives. And then thirdly, just a question, there's no state preemption with our ability to enforce this mandate, correct? At this point?
No,
A code.
because you're talking about, at this point, I think there's a distinction here. We have an ordinance on the books that specifically applies to some properties, but we're talking about expanding this to some other, beyond ones just in the combined area. Is that right?
So from this report, was it 30 some properties in the separate sewer area. So
Right,
this is completely different than the 3-year plan in the combined sewer area to disconnect everyone.
So
And
the
these are in violation of the actual state code as it's written now and
see.
village code as it's written,
Mhm.
which is different than the MMSD code that you had referenced earlier. That's for the combined area that has the 5 exemptions, if it's too close to a sidewalk or those
Right.
sorts of things. That doesn't apply here. This is, it's
Mhm.
a sanitary sewer. You cannot have not direct clear water into it. So
Mhm.
you have the teeth to
Mhm.
have them disconnect, and there really isn't much recourse for it.
So if I lived in, let's say I lived in Basin 6, can I call you? Can I find out, oh, they know I have X number of downspouts that should be disconnected that are not. They know I have a leaky lateral. They know how much, how good is your database on each property? If each property owner wants.
The leaky lateral, it's as good as the areas where we did the investigation. So it's where we did the dye water flooding or the
It's
village
address
did the wet
specific.
weather televising. Yeah, it's specific areas. It's not the
Address
entire.
specific.
Yeah.
So you
Yep.
have some.
Yeah, maybe a fifth of the basin, something like that.
All right, any final questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll close this item out. Thank you very much. This
Yep,
was
thank you.
really
Thank you.
informative and a ton of work. All right, moving on in the agenda. We have the consent agenda, item 5. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by trustee Ursing, seconded by trustee Lynn. Any discussion? Trustee Kudo?
I'd like to remove item E, please,
5E.
as in Eric.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? All right, thank you. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the exception of 5E, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 6, items removed from the consent agenda. We have 5E. Consider surveyor proposal for the public works site. Trustee Kudo.
Yep, I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I went through all of the optional survey responsibilities and specifications for this, and it all comes across as fairly basic. The heights of buildings, how many buildings, square footage. Where does this particular survey live within sort of the process of analyzing that parcel, right? So is this like step 1A, we just need to figure out what we have there and exactly what the parameters of the property are. And then 2, we've talked a number of times about, like soil testing and all the other things that'll have to go into this. Where are we on that?
Great questions. So this is a first step for establishing the boundaries, what's on the property, utilities, easements, location of infrastructure, i.e. the wall,
Mhm.
right? So that will start that process. It'll then also allow us to evaluate any encroachments coming from neighboring property owners, just to have a very good record of where we stand. When it comes to soil borings or things of the like, we have, I don't know if Phil's still.
He wisely.
Well,
loves.
I apologize.
Smart
So,
guy.
Yeah, we have started, we kind of have mapped out the work that we're doing for the public works site analysis, and I believe it's the first or the second meeting of November, they're coming back with that information. We won't, my understanding is at this time, we won't have conducted any soil borings, but we'd bring the information to you and say, here's what we have in total, and then any recommendations.
Oh.
So if there was to be further investigations such as a soil boring, then there would be more data and information to inform that.
So this really is just setting up.
Yeah.
Where we would do all that.
Well, it wouldn't be setting up where we would do the boring. We would
But
bring
we would
all.
know the boundaries of the property.
Yes,
right?
yeah. And that does become very critical when you're looking at that wall segment, because
Okay.
each of there are multiple different construction methods utilized on that wall as it
Mhm.
goes down. And then based upon the constraints of where buildings are located, or in some cases acting as the wall, then it would help inform if we were to determine and evaluate different construction, where we should place borings to determine what the soil type would be to help better inform cost estimation.
Okay. Follow up,
Yep.
if I may. Are these, I've not dealt with land surveys for municipalities before. You know,
That's odd.
for whatever reason. But do we not have surveys for all
No.
municipal property in the village? Is
No,
that a normal thing? Is that?
it,
sort of
it can
abnormal?
very well be, right? Because, in this instance, just in me, I'm getting into this site, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the parcel, when you pull title on it, the neighboring subdivision, was just being platted later on. I mean, those homes that abut up to the Public Works facility weren't even constructed at this time.
Mhm.
The main foundation of that building initially was constructed and then kind of grew over time. So, no, it's not atypical. We got a survey primarily for this parcel that had still been outdated for a period of time, which then we used to actually do the land division, for the parcel when we sold, the fire department to NSFD, as its own separate legal parcel. So it really just is a patchwork over the course of time, but I would say it's more, especially when we're with a municipality as old as we are, because we started we grew in population almost to what we were today in the 30s. So much was happening in terms of construction at that time. It wouldn't be abnormal.
Would it be abnormal? Right? So that we
No.
have surveys?
It-
Not that we're flush with cash.
Oh, proactively, you mean?
Right.
I would-
Just, I mean,
Yeah,
do
I'd
an
say it
inventory.
happens in instances like this.
Okay, so
Or
as we
others, when
go
you're doing
As you
work
need
on a
it.
parcel, or the same reason why we had surveyed this site is when, the modifications and reconstruction happened at the library, right? They needed to get a much more accurate view of what was there. And, if you're gonna do any substantial earth moving, I would,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, I guess my question stems from, although not necessarily related to sort of the inspection of village buildings, right? Like,
mhm.
you know, we're not quite sure what the surveys are, not quite sure of the condition aspects of some of the buildings. I just want to make sure that we're staying on top of something.
What I will share with you that I was so relieved that we had after kind of going through the or just some initial discussion on the wall last week, was all the digitization of the records, right? Because I definitely envision that I'm going to be going through all of those building files from
Yeah.
every parcel that abuts up to it based upon what was constructed, what's there now, just to get a really good, complete understanding of what we're working.
So,
It makes doing that a lot easier. Wouldn't have been able to find some of that stuff because it just would have been in the basement.
good on us for digitizing all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It did occur to me that we did pay for a survey last year of the nature preserve and it cost about $8,000. It seems to be in line with that, although this is a bigger site, so I'd say it sounds like a good deal. But I guess to Eric's point, I'm wondering if there is some sort of a plan, a communication plan for us about the public works site, about what, like, now we know we're doing this survey. Soil borings could be, who would we hire? You know what I'm saying? Decision points, like, is there some sort of a plan that
flow.
we could all
So
be in on
So I
about?
think the next point, which is when we get more information to help inform those next steps, I need that information to kind of see where we're at. And then, we'll look at the site analysis, and then I think once then we have some discussion, we can then begin engaging. It's just hard to know when you don't have
So it sounds like
the
November
information.
would be when we would, the soonest that we would have enough information to put
Mhm.
together that type of communication.
And then we could thoughtfully discuss what that communication looks like.
Mhm.
Is there potential for, not sure quite how to phrase this, as to do this work, dispute with neighboring property owners over boundaries of their property, or is it pretty clear cut to your view?
Well, first we need to figure out what's where and what's impacting it. And so this is this survey is one of the first steps to start that process for me. And then in order to gather the rest of the information, I would need to help inform what happened on the other properties. Want to bundle that together so that we're learning together. And so that's why my phrasing of, I want to use this to help inform how we then proceed with communication next steps. I'll be talking to you about those next steps once I have more information to help inform recommendations for next steps.
Got it.
And trustee Kudo?
I'm gonna make a motion. Unless your question, but I'll move to approve item E on the consent agenda.
Second.
And thank you for answering the questions.
So motion by trustee Kudo, seconded by trustee Ursing. I have one comment to make. To keep in mind that the purpose for getting the survey is to address, eventually, no matter what happens with the site, that retaining wall has to be addressed. And so this work would have to be done. So it's, and so to your point, trustee Arndorfer, if there is to be, it's whenever that wall is disrupted, it becomes a landline. So the room for dispute is there. However, a wall is going to be there, no matter what's on the site. Not that that's what you were asking, but it's just an interesting, just to remember like where we are in the process. It was good for me to take that into consideration. So with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for pulling that so we could have a thoughtful discussion. Moving on to item 7, public hearings. We have one this evening, public hearing on ordinance 3066, an ordinance to repeal and replace chapter 536 zoning floodplain regulations. This is something that Director Griepentrag has been working on. And that is a requirement. It went through the Plan Commission and was approved, and a hearing was conducted. And now I am opening up. Oh, and Director Griepentrag, is there any presentation that you want to make with this?
I do not have a presentation prepared, but I'd be happy to provide an overview if you'd like.
I
Otherwise,
think you might be
memo.
muted. Are you muted?
I'm not muted on my end.
Just while we're waiting for that, I chaired that meeting on the Plan Commission. And we talked through it in the meeting. I mean, we asked a lot of, could anything possibly come up on this? And there's nothing. It just is the
It's very
floodplain.
straightforward.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In fact, we were told by the DNR that we were the only municipality who so thoroughly reviewed it and came back with questions. So
All right. I will tell you, they send very, okay, thank you for that report. So.
Am I still muted?
Nope, there you are.
Oh, I'm here. Yes, I would, trustee Lynn very accurately provided that response from the DNR. So yes, we reviewed it thoroughly. We used their model ordinance. There really are no huge impacts in the village because no residential property is located within our floodplain. So in my opinion, and the Plan Commission's agreed opinion, this is pretty much just confirming what the DNR is requiring us to do through adoption of their model ordinance.
All right, so given that, I will now open up the public hearing at 8:42 p.m. If there are members of the public who would like to be heard, you can come to the microphone or raise your hand, state your name and address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to be heard on this matter? All right, I'm not seeing anyone, so I will close the hearing at 8:42 or 3. Attorney Baird, did I leave it open long enough?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And by the way, having had to draft this and adopt this in Glendale, just a shout out to Bart because this was a pull out your hair experience because the DNR sent this sort of model ordinance and then you had to plug it into the existing code sections. And there's about 400 internal cross references where you have to redo all of the sections. So nicely done.
Appreciate that. And I will say they sound very strongly worded emails to the chief elected official saying that you're responsible for this floodplain. And so it was very nice to be able to hand it off to Director Griepentag and know that it was taken care of. All right. So moving on from public hearing, we have item 8, citizens to be heard. And this is item is for matters not on the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to be heard on something not on the agenda this evening? Yes, ma'am. Please come up and say your name and address.
Evening. My name is Kate Cooper, CATECOOPER, 3922 North Maryland. And I want kind of just give you my experience with the increased traffic on Maryland since everywhere else is being redirected, which in general is actually less than I was fearing. But so I'm on that block between Capitol and Shorewood, and there's a stop sign on Shorewood 4-way, and then there's this 4-way at Menlo would be the next one. I'm crossing that intersection multiple times a day and like this time of night. And in the last 2 weeks, I've just I'm not hanging out staring at the intersection, but while I'm like actively crossing, there've been 3 cars flying through the stop sign, which I've been here 2.5 years. And I mean, I've seen it twice in 2.5 years. And twice I've almost been hit by that car. So I think it's just people who are unfamiliar. I don't think it's like maliciously flying through the stop signs, but they're also like this tall. I don't know if that's effective, if they're taller, if they're lit, if there's another one on Beverly temporarily because of all this, just to keep people in the habit of not going 40. But like one time I was actively crossing the street, and by the time this young girl was my daughter's age stopped, she and I were like 2 feet away from each other, so it could have been horrible for both of us. And I just wanted to kind of give a heads up to, I assume there's a public safety committee. I can call the police department too, because I was kind of thinking they could make a little money on some traffic violation tickets. But I do think somebody other than me should be keeping an eye on it. So I don't know where to really direct it.
That's great. So have you submitted any emails? You haven't,
This is my first.
oh, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to come and address the board. And I would say that typically when any of us receive an email of concern from a resident, we forward it to staff, and then the appropriate department sort of takes it up from there. The police department can do targeted enforcement around problem areas. And so that's what I would, if I receive such an email, I would forward it to the police chief and to Manager Ewald asking for that to occur.
Okay.
And so I,
Send an email. Is that
yes, I'm wondering if we can just
okay?
I would like to follow up. Oh, great.
Send you all.
So I'd be more than happy to receive your email and have it. And then we have a written record to follow up on.
We also have a crossing guard there, which is great, especially now. But, I don't know how that period of time is, 40 minutes maybe, and that's not just when there's going to obviously be a lot more kids now going through there, and including my own. So, yeah, we'll
Thank you
send
very
the
much.
email. Okay.
Thank you.
These
Yeah.
situations, you were a pedestrian then?
Yes, walking my dog. And I wasn't even dressed like a burglar at the time, so.
All right, well, stay safe in the meantime.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, and you are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. We're just getting. Okay,
Getting warmed up.
it's new business, so just buckle up. Item 9, we are moving on to new business.
Is there
Uh,
anybody else?
No, there are actually no other independent residents. Wait, are you? Oh, you would like to speak? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you behind trustee McGovern. Oh, because, and I can understand why. So thank you very much, Bonnie. It's good to see you. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that I can't see from my line of sight that I'm not? Okay. Thanks, trustee Ursing, for looking out. All right, 9A, consider ordinance. No, we did that. 9B. Oh, right. So 9A, consider ordinance 3066, an ordinance to repeal and replace chapter 536 zoning floodplain regulations. We've heard the public hearing. We've heard the report from the Plan Commission and from Director Griepentrag. The information is in our materials. I would take a motion at this time.
Happy to make it.
Oh.
I move to approve ordinance 3066, an ordinance to repeal and replace chapter 536 zoning floodplain regulations as drafted.
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Lynn, seconded by trustee Stokebrand. Any discussion? Hearing none, this will be a roll call vote.
Trustee McGovern,
Aye.
trustee Land,
Aye.
trustee Stokebrand,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
President McKay,
Aye.
trustee Ursink,
Aye.
trustee Kudo.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Moving on to 9B, consider ordinance 3064, solid waste code updates. This comes to us from the Public Works Committee. I would take a report from the Public Works Committee or entertain a motion at this time. Yes, trustee Ursink.
I can make a motion. So I move approval of ordinance 3064, an ordinance repealing and replacing section 2, refuse collection service of article 1, refuse collection of refuse collection and disposable of chapter 455 solid waste of the municipal code of the village of Shorewood.
Second.
Great, we have a motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Arndorfer. Any discussion? Hearing none, this will be a roll call vote as well.
Trustee Kudo,
Yes.
President McKay,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee McGovern,
Aye.
trustee Land,
Aye.
trustee Stokebrand,
Aye.
trustee Ursink.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Moving on to 9C, consider ordinance 3065 forestry code updates. This also comes to us from Public Works with a recommendation to approve. And trustee Ursink, is there any additional information or a motion?
Nope. So I'll make a motion.
Mhm.
So I move approval of ordinance 3065, an ordinance repealing and replacing chapter 466 of the municipal code of the village of Shorewood.
Second.
Motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Lynn. Any discussion? Hearing none, this will also be a roll call vote.
President McKay,
Aye.
trustee McGovern,
Aye.
trustee Lynn,
Aye.
trustee Stokebrand,
Aye.
trustee Ursink,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Kudo.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Moving on to 9D, consider public engagement plan from 2020 for the 2025 budget. This comes to us from the village manager's office by way of the Budget and Finance Committee earlier this evening. Trustee Stokebrand, would you like to give us an update from committee?
Yes, we approved it as presented. We were hoping, though, there was some discussion about the pop-ups, and there was a consensus that we felt staff time could be better used in another way. We appreciate the innovation, the willingness to show up on weekends But, you know, if it's really reaching out with handing out cards, we're wondering if the cards could be made available at these events. And with staff capacity, it just seemed like wouldn't be the best use of ours.
So the recommendation being to approve the committee,
Correct, as presented, with the exception
Exception.
of removing the county outreach pop-ups. It's not that we're going to remove them completely, but we wouldn't staff them. If there's a way to make sure, you know, perhaps someone involved with the Shorewood Farmers Market would make sure that there's a stack of postcards somewhere at the farmers market, something like that. If we could give some cards to someone from the bid for the open shops and ditto for the feast. We just didn't see that staffing. Some, you know, I don't know. We were also wondering too, I mean, there'll be alcohol. Some people who won't be from the village, you know, what, we just didn't think.
Okay. So would you like to make a motion? Are there any questions?
I did want to also mention that Budget and Finance, at least if not the entire board will have an opportunity to review the poll questions. And we were interested in keeping the poll to 7 to 10 minutes, I believe. And I'm missing anything else?
The poll in draft format will also come to the full board.
Mhm.
And just a numerical correction on lines 3, 4, and 5, that should be September 4th, the day after this meeting. Once the,
Okay,
this
so that's
plan is
beginning
approved.
with which item?
It's, if you look at the first or yellow line,
Okay,
consideration of public engagement plan, the line before that should go below September 3rd, and then create project-specific web page September 4th.
okay,
Those items were scheduled to start after your approval.
after today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just additionally, while wanting to keep the survey tight, opportunity to bring forward some other longer term ideas. We address the budget as parking meters might be an opportunity to listen community perspective on that. So, and maybe some other relevant items without it being a random grab bag that might concern people. But you know, I think you know, it's a new normal as described. So I think it would be helpful to try to get as firm a read on community sentiment. Some of these things and the path forward is.
All
I can
right.
make a motion.
Yes, please.
I move that we approve the 2025 budget communication plan with the changes noted, specifically reducing the staff input for community outreach pop-ups.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Trustee Ursink.
You know, I'm going to vote for this, but I do think there is some value in even doing one of the pop-up events like a farmer's market. We just get so much traffic at the market, and there's just so much community engagement, so many people from Shorewood, and whoever's in that sort of community booth is constantly talking to people. I feel like there is some value there, and maybe we don't do all three, maybe we just do one, but I would say it'd be great to have you know, we have the space available. It'd be great to have somebody come maybe for the first part of it or, you know, the whole thing, but it'd be great to have somebody at least for one of these events. I think it'd be front facing for the community would be good.
Just to give a little background, a little perspective on that, the pop-up was presented to us from Chris and it was his idea and he was going to be the one doing that. And part of our concern was we didn't want to just like throw Chris to the wolves and let people just come at him with
Rail.
why are my taxes so high? What are you doing to me? You know, that type of thing. Because while most people would be, oh, thank you for the card, appreciate it. Here's a reasonable question. I didn't personally, I didn't want to just throw Chris to the wolves like that because I didn't think that was fair to his part. If it was you and I in the something like that, that's a different thing. And I'd be happy to, you know, talk about that on the side,
Sure.
but
I'm typically there every market, you know, at least, you know, the beginning half of the markets, I stand right next to the community booth. And I think the spirit of the people at the market is generally very high. And, you know, I don't expect anybody to come to the farmer's market and grill Chris on taxes. You know, there might be some questions, but I think it would be a really positive, it'd be more positive than anything, especially if I can be there or if another trustee wants to come and hang out too. I think it'd be a positive thing, but I'm going to vote for this. I want to make my opinion known that at least one pop-up with a village staffer would be, I think, a really valuable sort of idea.
Yes, please come to the,
3922 North Maryland. I just kind of want to say that we're not wolves, and it's our.
Yes, but Chris is an employee, not an elected official. And so I didn't want to
Sure.
subject him
I-
personally to being attacked unnecessarily because as you can imagine, it does happen. And it's not fair to somebody like Chris who's doing an excellent job, here in the village. So
Okay.
point taken.
To me, that's kind of beside the point. It is our tax dollars as it's your tax dollars. And, you all know more about why these things need to have money be spent on them, and answers to questions that we have. And, so I don't think it's unreasonable to put yourselves out there where we can, ask questions and, you're going to get our opinions, but that's kind of the job, isn't it?
well, this is part of a huge public outreach plan that involves much bigger, more formal meetings. This was a proposal from one employee for himself to go places that we don't normally have scheduled public meetings, which we do on an annual basis for this. So there is tremendous feedback that comes in through this process, which goes on for months. And this was just one person doing one thing outside of the normal process, which we didn't feel was necessary.
Yeah, I was just going to say point taken though. I think we should watch how we refer to, I know it was a figure of speech. But I can understand the point taken. I think that since there was not opposition to having pop-ups in general to increase the touch points around this issue with people in the community and in less formal situations, I would volunteer to go with another trustee. And if we don't have, if there are ways that we can be available on a volunteer basis and we just communicate that through the village manager, I think we can take care of that informally.
Also this doesn't, we don't have to mandate pop-ups, but
Yeah.
if they want to do it, they should do it, and we should trust them to determine what is the best way to communicate with the community. And maybe pop-ups turn out to be fantastic, right? Like without trying it, it's hard to know.
Mhm.
But I don't think we're going to get any complaints that we tried to
Yeah, I mean, as somebody that's been a part of the feast and the farmer's market, I'm like, every year I'm asking, I'm trying to get more village, involvement. I know it's the weekend, I know it's, overtime, but I think these events, having somebody there would go a very long way. And maybe it's not staff, maybe it's one of us, but I do think, I really appreciate Chris, volunteering his time for this. And I think there'd be a lot of value there. If we vote yes on this with removal of these, can we coordinate something? Can we still coordinate something?
Village board members can engage. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable, just the amount of traffic and the amount of, that we get at these events.
My concern is staff capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a point of clarification. Is there a motion on the floor
Yes, there is.
There is.
with no second?
Are you
Would-
kidding? Oh, how did I let all that happen?
With
I apologize. I was out of order.
would the maker of the motion allow for a friendly amendment? Just to,
Oh, I seconded it.
Yeah, there was a
That's
second.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a
Okay.
oh, I still want to make a
It
friendly
went- it
amendment.
went from-
So there.
You can still do that. Yeah.
I get to talk. Again, so can we just make, as opposed to taking out the pop-ups, can we just leave it to staff discretion? and Chris can do what Chris thinks is in the best interest of the communication. I mean, I'm just, let's leave some flexibility for staff. If they're overburdened and they can't do it, then.
If I may, that's actually a changing the motion. So it doesn't sound like I think a friendly amendment could be, actually, I think we should just take action on this. Point of order. I'm
we
not
need to-
sure that that is a friendly amendment, but we can run it through Attorney Bear and consider the motion, the maker of the motion.
Attorney Bear.
I didn't understand the original motion to expressly prohibit it. It's just not requiring it of staff because the way I read it, it was a list of requirements that were going to be done. So I
Right.
think it sounds reasonable to me. I mean, as if there's unanimous consent to do it that way, I think you can do it. It's sure you can move to make that
Yeah, we're-
amendment.
Okay.
We just have the motion read.
Hmm.
Please.
Trustee Stokbrand moved to approve the public engagement plan for the 2025 budget, specifically with reducing the staff pop-up time involved, and it was seconded by Trustee Lynn.
So it does require a reduction in staff.
Takes away the expectation.
There's a motion or a second. Could I provide a suggestion? Would it be possible, I think having done the Shorewood Farmers Market before in past years, just with general communication, I think it is a really great way to connect with people. It doesn't, there's not alcohol at that one. It's low key. It's on a Sunday morning. Typically people tend to be in a more positive mood, like Trustee
Yep.
or she could shared. What if we coordinated the opportunity for any of you to also attend and be there? We could provide the flair, the whatever, and then we would just go through the
Like buttons?
postcards and,
Whatever.
things, dog poop bags.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, that's the point. It should be us.
Okay, yeah.
That's fine.
But, and then we could just coordinate who of you would like to
Yeah.
attend and kind of hear feedback.
I will
Yeah.
be there the whole time, so you guys get to,
No,
I
really,
might be
that's
able to
right.
do the shops. I might be able to do the shops up
Okay.
in Shorewood.
So if
So-
there's, 2 or more available for any of these, we'll put it out to you guys if you guys want to do that. And then we'll just provide you with the information before you go.
Mhm.
Is
So
that
would the friendly amendment be putting the pop-ups back in and leaving it to staff to coordinate who will go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good
All right.
ask.
Yeah. Oh,
Trustee Stokbrand, are you
I
okay
agree.
with my friendly amendment?
Yes, I do.
Well, thank you very much.
And Trustee Lynn? Okay. Yes. Okay. So
You want to talk about it more?
it sounds like the motion is to approve the plan as presented with the exception of staff being required to facilitate the pop-ups. Staff to staff the pop-ups. That's great.
But staff can still,
They can participate if they want.
it's
It's
discretion.
discretionary.
in this instance, I would suggest that everyone needs a buddy at one of these events.
Yes.
So if there's not 2 of you, we're not going to staff it. But we'll provide you with everything that you need to have in advance of going and support that effort. So part of it's just kind of, communication with all of you and,
Mhm.
and,
Staff's going to do the coordination, but not the staffing of the
Yeah.
event. The trustees are going to do the staffing as the event if they're available.
Okay.
And it's 9:10.
Just, especially with the farmer's market, it'd be great to coordinate, with us at the market. I can put my market hat on and figure out an appropriate date because as we get into fall, it gets a little bit more challenging with weather. The numbers start to decrease. So this really sweet spot for the farmer's market, is sooner than later.
The state
Sure.
is
Could
set.
we do that offline?
Oh, the date is set.
but I'm happy to entertain.
Yep, I see it now.
But more importantly than anything, we're going to be talking with you all.
That's great.
Call the
I would
question.
like,
this could be-
I'd like to close discussion and take a vote. So all those in favor?
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Oh, motion carries. What? It did. So trustee Stokbrand and trustee Lynn accepted it. Does that I don't know if friendly amendments have to have a,
Well, does the person that's,
yes,
there was unanimous,
yeah. You're good. Thanks for
as
asking
long
that.
as you get the.
All right, that brings us, thank you for the robust discussion. 9E, review of high impact options for the 2025 budget. This comes to us from the village manager's office. There is a memo. It's the last document in the packet this evening. There was also an email forwarded that was a compilation of trustee questions, asking for more information. I think that'll be included in the minutes of this meeting when they're brought back to us. So I'm assuming that everybody has reviewed the memo, so we don't need to walk through all those. The purpose this evening is to ensure understanding, technical understanding, to ascertain whether or not there's any additional information that the trustees want in order to consider any of these when it's time as part of the budget. We are not being asked for action tonight, and we are not necessarily, while any one of us can share opinions or rankings or sort of their comfort with any of these or interest in any of these, it's not required of our discussion this evening. So in preparing this item, we realized that the main job tonight is to educate, so that when there is a budget in front of us, we know that we've had enough information to consider those things. And when would it this information would come back to us as part of a proposed budget, correct?
In as the most immediate next step would be in language to poll the public in terms of.
That's right.
Of options.
That's
So
right.
we're putting
Sorry.
together just content in that way.
Yeah, apologies. That was right in front of me. So with that, the way that I would propose that we move through this item is to take them in order to just check for understanding, technical questions, requests for more information, and then do just a go around to get a pulse in the room if anybody wants to express any positions, support, interest, opposition, etc. So with that, I would open up discussion around the levy increase of 2, 4, 6, or 8%. That would bring us more in line with keeping up with increased costs. And so with the information presented ahead of, in front of us, are there questions that the trustees have or more information that you need?
I
Trustee-
did have a question. Is 340,000, is that that's obviously for some reason I was thinking it had gone up to 370, but 340 is our average assessed value.
Correct.
Well, I guess it seems to me that at a minimum, we have to go with the 2%. That was what our policy was before. I guess the difficult thing here, as we discussed a little bit in the business and finance meeting, is if our goal is diversification and currently 75% of our revenue comes from property taxes, how do we determine where it comes from? How much lower than 75% do we want to go? And we only, it's difficult because we don't know what the end goal is yet. So how do you know and say, well, I'm comfortable with 60% of our property tax funding municipal government, but I don't know yet what the end point is. And so that's making it difficult. It's hard for me to say I can go for 4% without knowing what the other pieces are. And when I met with Christina and David and Rebecca, I think in July, Christine at that time mentioned that she thought it was going to be a multiple pronged approach. And I would agree with that. I don't think it, we can't, I'm not comfortable going with a levy of 8%. And so to me, it's a situation of narrowing it down to how many different levers do we want to pull
Mhm.
besides property tax. And I guess it looks to me, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a homeowner. It looks to me like most of the options come down more, other than the wheel tax, they come down on the residential property. Is that fair to say?
Mhm.
Um,
Although the levy increase would apply to commercial properties as well.
true,
So
right.
that's the only one that, spreads the burden. Although we
Right.
have our split between commercial and private, property
Funding.
owner
Right,
contribution is not even, which is an argument for more development, but that's another.
right. And I know we did talk a little bit about adding parking meters to the list. And then I also was curious about finding out about the water utility, having it run outside of the village. When we did our public works studies, there were several municipalities that did not, they outsourced their water utility. And I would just like, for a point of information, someone to tell me why that's a good or a bad idea. And would
Okay,
that
so
save money?
those are requests for additional information in the.
And so that doesn't help
Okay.
you with the levy increase.
Well, so basically, I mean, we're all familiar with how tax levy works. And so percentage wise, this lays out what we could expect. In recent history, our tax levy increases have been minimal and sometimes very, very low, and that was the priority. So this is just it's the same function. It's just generating, it's choosing a higher percentage to levy and adding that accordingly. So I would understand if there's not a lot of questions around this. Okay. Moving on to the next strategy, recycling refuse user charge. This would be a new source of revenue. It is still an additional cost to the parcel owner. Does anybody have any questions about how this would work? What to expect? Need for more information before you could consider it?
So, yeah, we discussed this briefly too. We would remove the subsidy for composting, correct?
Correct.
And then, which is a minimal cost. It's 6,000 a year, but I understand what we're getting at here. I mean, less subsidies saves money, right? But then each single property, or would this be 1, 2, and 3? Our typical residential designation is 1, 2, and 3 families. Like a 3-family, 3-unit rental would pay 150. Is that correct? The same as a single family. What I'm saying.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question about the $6,300 subsidy. If we get rid of that, is there an additional financial impact on that? Like, do we get charged more for sending more solid waste to the landfill?
No, my understanding is that that subsidy is offsetting the subscription rate to the private citizens that participate in composting. So it would just mean that, like, for instance, I compost, my subscription price would go up.
Right, but I mean, if people decide to stop using it because they're not getting the subsidy anymore.
Oh, I
and we
see.
run
If
the
that
risk of having higher
decreases
costs.
use, then would we incur a higher cost than $6,300 by
Right.
increased waste?
Okay. And then another question on these, I think this question would apply to this fee change, and then the one on the light where the street lights, where we would just impose a charge either for refuse or for street lights instead of it being just out of your taxes. Is that change you're allowed to deduct $10,000 from your income
Right.
based on your property taxes. If it's not a tax anymore, does that come out of that?
That's the downside. My understanding, that's the downside of fees is that they're not tax deductible, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why historically Shorewood as a policy has always kept everything on the levy is because at least there's a deduction for the
Right.
property owner.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to understand better, how much that 150 compares to what someone is paying already for the service. So if
Composting.
you're a homeowner, $340,000 house, I mean, what are you paying indirectly already? No, for garbage service.
Oh,
Oh,
like when we price that, when we line
Correct.
item your tax bill of what goes where.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we recall?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but we could figure
Is
it
that a
out.
number we can get to? I'm just trying to
Oh.
figure out how much of an incremental increase this
Sure.
is.
Well, pretty much like the bulk of your assessed value is commercial, right? Where the lowest portion, but it makes up a huge chunk of the pie. So, that $150 right now is being spread across all properties in the village, whether they're residential or commercial, receiving the service or not, because our commercial don't receive the service.
Okay, so is this the 150 equivalent to what people are paying now, one way or another? Or I'm just trying to figure out if
No,
this
we
is
can
an
get you
increase.
that
Okay, all right.
the difference. I just don't have that.
Yeah, no, that's
right
fine.
now.
I
Yeah,
just
but I
wanted to try
definitely
to
will
understand what the
put that down.
incremental in. Thank you.
And just because this came up and
Mhm.
because we're in this detail, we would need to go back and figure out, because there are some households who, from my understanding, purchase additional refuse containers,
Carts, right?
right? So
Mhm.
that has not been factored into this. But we would need to come up with a policy and a process for it
Mhm.
and charge.
Mhm.
And so this includes garbage, recycling, and yard waste.
No,
No.
only refuse and recycling.
Only garbage and recycling.
Correct,
No yard waste bags or stuff at the.
correct.
All right, hearing nothing else. Municipal vehicle registration fee. Questions on this or requests for more information?
So this is the most time sensitive, right? We need to decide this tonight. Due to state
It's
state
not listed
limitations.
for
to-
action tonight, but if I could get some indication, because there's preparatory work that I'd want to provide back to you as soon as possible.
Okay. So maybe we can address that with when we go around to see what kind of comfort level. All right, any questions or need for more information before you can consider it? Okay. Streetlight system replacement charge. Questions on what this means?
I think
Require.
This one makes a lot of sense to me
Mhm.
personally. I mean, it's very clear what it's for. There's obvious demand for us to do something here and it's time bound and specific. So I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Question about, so churches, schools, when we talk about nonprofits, right? I think there was something here about they would be assessed a cost also, right?
Correct.
And so how much, let's say St. Robert's or Luther Memorial Chapel can go? Any idea how much? I mean, obviously the schools would have.
So in this description, I did not include within that formula any existing taxing entity. Because essentially, we would then assign a fee to ourselves, which then we would then pass on to the taxpayers, no differently than the school district would do. Right. So,
Mhm.
for the tax exempt property owners, they would pay, the suggestion was for them to pay 2 units or $306 per parcel. In St. Robert's case, from looking at that data, they have 4 parcels. So what we're trying to align here is, those who benefit from the system and having them pay their proportionate share. I think they're the largest though. I think most of the, I'd have to go back and look at the list and I can do that. But, you know, Kingo, I believe, is 1 parcel.
Presbyterian. I mean, the
One
school is going to be
parcel.
the one that's going to be really be hit.
But they're a taxing entity.
Right, so they would not fall into this category.
Oh, I'm sorry. So they would pay nothing,
Correct,
but St. Robert's.
correct.
Because they're
And
tax
the
exempt.
thought process there is that the school is a taxing entity, so if we charge them, they're going to pass on that fee to.
And I thought it was interesting. We have this, there's a sentence about electrical cost savings for the light fixtures. Appellant. It'd be great if we had some data.
Oh, we do.
Like-
So that was pulled just from looking at the electrical usage.
We have a breakdown so we can, for that commercial district.
I don't believe, I just saw it by budget.
If there's any way that, I think that would be helpful
Yeah.
if we
I don't-
decide to go this.
Yeah, I don't
But
know.
So.
Oh, the cost savings. Yeah, I don't know if there is, but I can definitely ask.
And so is there, if we decided to go forward with this, we're stuck with a 25-year period just because that's the way the bonds work.
Right, so what I tried to do is equate the period of time that we would be paying on the bond. So the project takes 5 years to implement. And so we're bonding at separate times over that 5 years. The estimated cost, our present day estimate is that 17.4 million. Yes, 17.4 million. But when you borrow, your interest rate's going to be different, right? So that formula calculates so that it's equitable going across the entire span of the borrowing. So bonds are typically, you're paying on them for 20 years. I added 5 years for that because it's the timeline of implementation. And then everyone pays by that unit over the course of the 25-year period. And I have this spreadsheeted or put in a spreadsheet so it can be clear for you. If you want to
So
get
that
down.
can
to-
be provided
Yeah.
before we would need to take action.
Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah, happy to walk
Yep.
you through it.
so that's the good part about tonight is figuring out, since we're not being forced to make a decision, we can certainly share, what our comfort level is with any of these, but, we're not taking an official vote, so there's time to review that level of detail.
And so this would be something that would show up on the property tax. In
Correct.
addition to your regular levy amount, you could have a recycling refuse.
Correct,
You could have a street light
correct,
line item, like
correct.
All right, thank you. The next item being parking utility fund balance. This is a one-time revenue that would benefit the 2025 budget only. Any questions?
I guess my question there is like, what's the state of the parking lots right now? So, I mean, if we exhaust this fund, next year, are we going to be back, having to do work on one of the lots, and then pay for it out of the general fund?
So my understanding is that we don't have cost estimates on what it would take to reconstruct all of these. If I'm, Leanne, you can correct me. But the thought here is that typically those would be taken from the parking utility fund. When the fund balance was kept, it was with the thought first, the theory was when it was started, that they would possibly buy additional land for purposes of creating parking. And then that kind of transitioned to, oh, well, that's maybe not the thought process anymore. And now it's been and many times used for maintenance. So looking forward, if we don't want to be in positions to have to let the pavement replace it get so bad on some of the lots that we're currently providing parking on, then we should, from a policy perspective, see what else we can do with those lots. There is one lot, particularly with, that's located just south of Harry's and that also services the River Park, that I don't ever see us getting rid of those. So potentially these funds could help offset future improvements that may need to be done at a future point in time. The benefit from that perspective of reconstructing lots is that hopefully by that time it could help fund improvements, so it wouldn't as much hit the tax levy. And then hopefully you'll be gaining some level of fund balance to maintain, and then moving forward, could potentially dissolve it and then absorb those costs through the general fund by borrowings 20 years down the road.
Okay, but I guess my question, I mean, there's no burning project on the near term time horizon that we would be depriving ourselves of this source of funding for if we choose to exhaust this one.
None budgeted for at this time.
Okay.
So it's not officially robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's also possible that should we see development in the future in the village that uses TIF financing, that a new TID could potentially pay for parking reconstruction of lots that are nearby or within the district. So
Also a possibility, yes.
so it's kind of, to recap, it sounds like you either kind of sit on this fund for a rainy day, and it's can only be used for
Well-
reconstruction of lots or improvements.
Correct. But we also perform maintenance out of this account. So,
Right.
in this last year, we had about 15,000 in maintenance costs, right? Because you have pavement that sometimes
Mhm.
needs to be modified or
Or
fixed, and
striping
You're
or.
going to have that come up. So that doesn't hit the general fund right now. That all funnels through the parking utility.
Mhm. Or we expend it right now to address a known gap that we have, and that the use of these funds now protects some additional cost from going to property owners.
Mhm. Ideally, we'd want to have policy direction determining where those funds go versus one-time revenue, because you want to see them maximized to the best that they can. But
So it's,
the board could, you always have the purview to say a one-time budget plunk is how you choose
right,
to
it
maximize.
doesn't, right, it doesn't solve that compounding revenue gap. Mhm.
I think we use one of those lots for storing snow in the winter. Is that correct? And
Correct.
is there any other sort of municipal or like village function of those lots though that we would be losing out on if we, got out of the parking business and just privatized them?
That would be a major policy decision
Mm-hmm.
that we would need the parking utility for.
Right.
No, well, if I'm, if you got down to just having, then if you privatized or eliminated, the northernmost lot on Oakland and the one next to the Sheridan on South Oakland, it really leaves you with River Park. And then the Village Hall parking lot and Hubbard Park, which has minimal impact on the utility at all, to the extent that we did not fund that reconstruction through the utility. Because you couldn't justify that to an auditor. So you'd really be left with River Park, which also has public good from providing parking for the park. Lot C was also, we paved over that, paid for that from the utility because we began using it for snow storage.
Bless you.
The primary reason why we had the parking utility at the beginning, and this spans back years, so philosophy's kind of changed and how the parking work changed over time, but was to generate funds to do future improvements or parcels for parking. And because at that time and for, decades, we were the person who would sell on private property, parking stalls be permitted with overnight parking. So it wasn't on village land, but we were a hub for the community to kind of come to us to say, okay, where can I find overnight parking? And if it's on a private lot, then we'd have independent agreements with all those private lots. We eliminated that practice when we went through the revision of the overnight parking permit and as a result of the 2020 transportation and parking analysis.
And that was all driven by a resistance to overnight parking on street parking, right? And so with the change of that policy, it completely changes the demand for off-street parking in public lots.
Did I answer your?
Which is bringing like.
That was a
200
lot of different.
Bringing in like
Exactly.
$250,000 a year.
Mhm. Okay. So the final strategy would be delay capital asset purchases and develop a capital asset policy. Policy development wouldn't necessarily occur before the budget is approved this year. But there would be a sort of a hold on purchasing until that policy could be developed. So it'd be a one-time saving, or it's more of a deferral of cost rather than
For non-critical items.
right for non-critical
So
items.
I would never recommend that you do not budget for, you have some things that we need to get done. But I think as we have a policy discussion on the capital budget, which I think as a community we're ripe to do at this point, it's really going to have us delve into why do we fund capital equipment? What do we need versus what do we want? And then having more firm schedules and how we roll out over a period of 20 years. That's going to help refine the capital number that's utilized in the long range plan, which is driving these. It provides us a way to forecast more definitively. And then set some policy. We have a capital budget policy now, but it's a further refinement of that. There are a number of communities who will budget a portion of each item in all of the years ramping up to larger purchases versus what we have done, at least that I can see for the last 15 years, which is large piece of equipment, borrow for the whole thing in 1 year. In many cases, that's just not becoming practical because of the fact that you'll order a vehicle in 1 year and get it at the tail end of the following year. So much like fire equipment, when a fire truck takes 3 years to acquire, NSFD asks us to all sign resolutions for that because the same people making those decisions in year one are likely not going to be the same people actually acquiring the asset in year 3. So then they divide up that cost over a period of years and fund it periodically. So just different approaches. We've had one style here, which has worked for a really long time. But I think it would be helpful to consider those other options.
All right, questions on that strategy?
I mean, there's delaying purchases assets. Are there any selling currently held assets? I mean, like the street sweeper, just things that we have that, and maybe I'm like Buff, I'm just not seeing it, but I haven't seen the street sweeper in a while. So is that a viable option?
We have a street sweeper, but most of the time when you see in the capital budget, if we have a replacement of an item, the other item is sold
Right.
typically, and then right now there's just minimal value, right? So it's never ending up, and we take that into consideration when we budget for it.
I mean, not replacing it, just selling it.
Oh, so from a policy perspective, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the questions we would be asking ourselves as we go through the policy. And not necessarily buy equipment, but what do we want to think about?
Right.
Right? What do we not, maybe there's something maybe it leads to a longer discussion. The capital budget and that policy is really the start of laying a framework for how we're going to evaluate things in advance of the budget.
Mhm.
There should be no items coming to your, in my perspective, but this is just me. No items should just be coming to you for the first time in your budget.
Okay.
I mean, all of them, if they're just getting submitted to me in the capital budget time, the question becomes, where is the forethought and how are we planning for it? Because you can't just drop some of these numbers into a capital budget when historically you haven't funded it more than 500 or 550,000 for the last 6 or 7 years.
Mhm.
So, we have one truck in the capital budget that's 280,000. I mean, so you got to think about those timings. But I also think it's more beneficial for also the department head because, you can choose to just defer for a longer time span, but it doesn't also help the fact that you may have a piece of equipment that is just, it's going to blow out. And then at that point, you don't have any reserve in your capital fund to help mitigate something. It's not budgeted for. And so then you're tapping into your 30% of reserves. So it's like, how do you find that sweet spot? But right
Right.
now we don't have a balance there because we as a community, and it's not a bad decision, right? About 10, 15 years ago, we said, we're going to cut down our fund balance to keep that reserve of 30%, which is very conservative and reasonable. And we're going to use that fund periodically over time to offset debt,
Right.
right? Very practical approach. But now every year we're at, I don't want to see us hover below that 30% because it is assisting in our bond rating. That's one of the key things that people look at. And we know that we're going to need to do that.
Mhm.
So want to protect that, but where else can we make some changes?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that as we go through all this, that
Yeah.
everything's on the table, that there are no
Mhm.
sacred cows.
Yep.
I think that's why having a policy, regardless of what we
Mhm.
decide, I think having a policy moving forward, it's like many things have changed. The time it takes to get, to actually replace technology, we're going to be talking about service levels, all those kinds of things. I think it's a really perfect time. Because we've been having the conversation kind of like in bits and fits and starts, but it's always right at budget time, which is not the time to have a thoughtful discussion or come to consensus. Trustee Stokebrand.
At one point, we discussed taking, if there was a project, we would take the money for the road. I discussed it with you and David, and Christina, something about if there was a project, we would take some of the money and use it to fund the road that was done for the water project, and you'd add it to the water utility.
Right.
So for purposes of the 2025 budget, we can conceptually talk about how to divide those costs, but for right now, until we have a level of understanding of how the PSC is going to look at our rate increases over the course of time, because remember, they're focused on 2 years in recalibrating those rates. And my focus is 5, 10 years, and then getting a more detailed review on that specific water main and the roadway and what type of improvements. That's all something that I have a parking lot list, right? Because we got to start at one point and work our way back into some of the other discussions. That is one on that list. But we need to learn more as we go through the rate increase this year with the Public Service Commission, and we will continue to keep learning with them because I think as other communities more thoroughly evaluate how they're going to address LSL, perhaps the environment may change, may not, but
And so the item number 2, the recycling reuse fee, we would not create another utility.
no,
Because
it would be listed as a charge. However, it does, I think what it does do is set up the platform to show people what they're paying for those services. And then allows you to think about that as you move through discussions of future facilities and replacement of the equipment in general, as because this is the operational cost that you're seeing. You're not seeing the capital equipment that takes deploying that service. So the refuse trucks, the transfer stations, right? It's the costs that have been put into that charge or, that concept of charge is everything within your operational budget. Because taking that out of the operational budget for this year creates more room for the debt that you are taking on for the projects that we have bonded for.
I guess in a perfect world, we'd be at the point where we could charge based upon weight, because then you would encourage people,
Mhm.
but
Right.
that's not even on the.
No.
Well, it's not right now.
Mhm.
It's a great, I think, the Conservation Committee has looked at that, but there's more than just the charging per weight. You need to have trucks that can assess weight, refuse containers that are, chipped or tagged. There's more finite
More
detail,
implementation.
but this would be
A way
a
to start.
first step
I mean, that
to,
might be the next generation
right.
after this generation.
correct. And likely, I haven't delved into the latest and greatest in refuse trucks lately. But I think that would also play a role in kind of your decisions on, in the future,
Service
what you'd
level.
want to see.
Mhm. Right, but good questions. So within the scope of our decision-making this year, now I just kind of like to do a lightning round and give members the chance of weighing in on kind of where you're at with your comfort level with any of these, what you could see supporting, if you're comfortable or ready to share any of that, not required, but just before we end tonight. So I'll start there and go around. So, Trustee Ursing.
Sure.
Mhm.
Fantastic. I think obviously, looking at our upcoming budget and, the deficits we may have, really have to be open-minded to all of these to a certain degree. I think, I can't see myself like starting off at number one at the levy increase. I can't see myself going to 8%. I could see myself going to 4%. 6% would be a stretch, but there could be a good conversation there. I know we're running at a $700,000 deficit right now going into 2025. So that 6% increase alone, while huge for the taxpayers here in Shorewood, would help offset that deficit alone. Recycling refuse user charge, I'm not 100% there. Municipal vehicles, the wheel tax, I could probably get behind that one pretty easily. Street light replacement surcharge charge, that's something that I'd be on board with as well. The parking utility fund is not something that I'm really 100% supportive of right now, but I could probably get there if need be. And then the delay of capital asset purchases, I think I'd need more sort of a bigger sort of picture, more conversation on that. So I think the ones that I'd be on board with right away are street lighting, levy increase, as well as the wheel tax.
Thank you.
I'll just go in order as well for simplicity. Levy increase, I think we're going to need something, and I would want to look at all the other options first, though, to just keep that one as small as possible. Wisconsin, we pay really high property taxes, Shorewood especially. We've had school referenda that's going on all around the state. So that I would see as, if we have to do it to maintain our government necessities and the quality of life here, then yes, but that should be kind of our last resort. The recycling refuse charges, I guess I could live with, getting rid of the subsidy for compost since it's so small. Although I love composting, I'm always in favor of anything we can do for climate. I'm willing to make that sacrifice just to the reality of the finances in the village are that we've got to make some changes, and we're gonna have to do some things that are unpopular and personally distasteful. But just overall, I prefer keeping our expenses in the tax bill, and rather than splitting things out into fees and kind of turning into like Spirit Airlines where you have extra charges that you're not expecting. At a personal preference, I'd rather just have one tax bill that I know it's going to be like every month, coming out of my mortgage. It's just, I feel like that's easier, and it almost kind of looks like accounting tricks to try to put it into a fee or split it out some other way. But I'm open to discussion on all these things. The parking utility fund balance, I'm in favor of, getting creative with that funding that's available to us now. We've got immediate needs right now. I don't think we have to worry too much about, refurbishing parking lots in the future. It'd be my preference that we're not in that business anymore. And we do really have a financial crunch right now. So if we're saving this for a rainy day, I think we're in that right now, that we should be using that for things this year and going forward. Delaying capital asset purchases, I think that's just a reality. We're gonna have to do that. I like the idea of developing a longer term policy. I just think it's, good policy and good planning to, plan these things out so that you're not making these decisions every year. I think we will have to delay some of these purchases that we want, but have it be part of a policy and not just like a one-off thing or something that you're just delaying it to make the numbers look better. And then the last one, I think I must have skipped over the wheel tax, which I think that's one that I could live with pretty easily. It's become quite popular around Wisconsin, which kind of says a lot about the way our legislature has consistently cut funding for local governments. But wheel taxes, I think, make a lot of sense. Roads cost a lot of money. Driving cars, that imposes a lot of costs on a local government, fixing roads and so on. So I think people understand that, if you own a car, some of that, you're gonna have to pay some taxes to make the roads nice. And that's something that I feel I could get behind pretty easily. And then make one more plug for building more housing here in Shorewood so that we have more taxpayers and associated revenue here in Shorewood, and more people sending their kids to the school, which helps us get money from the state for the school district.
Did you comment on streetlight charge?
Yeah, I'd prefer to just keep that
Got
in
it.
the taxes.
Okay. Thank you. Trustee Lynn?
Yeah, my preference would be for the 8% increase in the property tax levy. I think it's best to keep all of that in the levy. I think that is the smartest policy wise for us. That's the only way we definitely get the money that we absolutely do need. I think that part of living here in this village is that we do keep a high property tax rate so that we can provide great services, so that we can keep this the way that it is. My wife's family have owned a home here in the village for 70 years. And there were some of those great years where that property tax levy was less than 2%. And I think that there's a time that we could maybe get back to that when everything isn't breaking at exactly the same time, because it's all 100 years old, all at the same time. But my biggest concern is that if we don't do this, if we don't get the money that we need now, that a future board might not be as reasonable as everybody here is in looking at options and doing different things, and they may make big mistakes and choose to delay or defer things to avoid a property tax increase that we can make, that we can afford, that is beneficial for our community, at the expense of all of us who live here. And I think the perspective that I'm coming from is not just as somebody who's paying taxes here this year or has for the last 10 years, or like my father-in-law who's paid for the last 70 years, but as somebody who intends to pay taxes here for the next 70 years. This is where I want to be forever. And I want to know that this village is going to be financially stable for the entire time that I'm here, that my kids are here. And I'm concerned about not being willing to do what needs to be done, which is to raise the levy as much as is required. We have too much on our plate. So that is my first preference, is the levy increase of 8%. I don't like breaking up the fees, as you mentioned. However, I will say the streetlight system replacement plan charge, I mean, that's nobody here's fault. It's a big project. It has to be done. It's frankly a danger to the community to leave it as it is. It needs to be funded. So I would like to, I'd be open to that as well. I'm open to a vehicle registration fee, although I drive a hybrid, so I already pay quite a steep fee in that, but I'd be open to doing that. And I'm not particularly interested in the recycling and refuse charge or the parking utility change. I don't like the idea of delaying capital equipment purchases, but I do think establishing a capital equipment policy going forward is the right thing. So just to wrap it up, the 8% levy is my first choice. I think that's the smartest policy, and I think it is the best way forward.
Yes, thank you. Trustee Sobrian?
So I would support a levy increase of 2 to 4%. And I could probably go along, I would be willing to consider everything else on the list. Least likely recycling charge. I think the street light, I could get on board with that, probably more likely than the others. I would find that more palatable. A charge for that, you know, it's 25 years and I'll be gone by the time it's done, but I think that it's very clear what you're getting, right? I would like to somehow find a way to charge people who come to our village. That's the allure of the parking meter to me, is people who are driving through the village. And I guess that's one of the things that is not on the list, but in talking with someone from Bike and Ped Safety, you know, a system that catches people running red lights and having noisy vehicles and things like that, and using that as a alternative revenue stream seems like a wise idea to me. But anyway, that's where I am with all these other, you know, the asset policy. I think it would be wise. I mean, it's green to drive a vehicle more than, you know, to drive them longer. That's the greener thing to do. And I think if you do have the assets for the reserve, you suddenly have an expensive piece of equipment that goes down and dies after you've driven it for 12 years instead of 10 years, you should be able to roll with that.
I would add really quickly, I'd be on board with parking meters as well. I mean, I didn't mention it because it's not on the list, but as long as we're talking about big policy changes, there's real benefits to that. Currently, we give that all away for free. That space is really valuable. You can use that space for a lot of things. And if people want to pay to park, great, you know, that's fine. But, you know, provides a little bit of revenue, and lots of communities have them. Whitefish Bay has them, Milwaukee has them. So I think that's something we should look at as well.
My concern about the parking meters is I wish I knew where's the sweet spot for vacant buildings when you can start, you know, how vibrant and healthy does your business community need to be? But we also do have 2 parking ramps. Long term, I could see that as a possibility.
Thank you. Trustee Onderver?
Yeah, I guess just looking at it, the thing that's on my mind, I just want to get a better understanding. Term picture looks, what the whole is looking like, or look the upcoming. But I just need to on the longer term piece more. But and I think it's like others, just looking at how we can best employ the combination approaches here. So levy increase, I'd say off top, I could see 2 to 4%. That's just where I'm at. Recycling refuse user charge, I mentioned earlier. I just want to get an understanding of how this 150 compares to what the actual cost is right now. Wheel tax, I have don't love it, really don't love it. Would rather avoid. Could see it as a stopgap if needed. That's just where my head's at, right? But again, just the longer term picture there would be helpful. And on my own part. spoke about the streetlight piece before. Parking utility fund balance, I think that can be a helpful tool just as a bridge for this coming periods that, you know, we can maybe have more of an opportunity to step back and look at other things that we could do and have a better understanding of what would be the true, you know, a new capital replacement approach, things like that. So just like there's a balance of the near term and longer term and understanding how all the different pieces can fit together. Delay capital asset purchase. I mean, I think that obviously responsibly so, but yeah, I mean, I think there's an opportunity to just step back there and assess. So yeah, that's where my head's at right now. Again, I mean, I do think, you know, that's one of the reasons why I'm also just interested in getting, you know, some read on where the public's head is at around the idea of parking meters. I mean, I know how the public feels about parking meters, but they are probably, you know, it's a way to get revenue without hitting property owners again. So, which is what most of the rest of these things do. So, most if not all. So that's wrong.
Thank you. Trustee Kudo?
Is this one of those opportunities where I just could say pass? And then come
You
back?
can, actually. I purposely said no one's
Don't do it.
obligated.
Don't do it.
Yeah, really. There's a lot here. There's a lot to chew on. You know, we're in an unfortunate position, right? Where we have a ton of really expensive needs, not enough money, not enough avenues, you know, to raise resources. You know, generally speaking, as a matter of policy, I'm open to anything, right? I mean, I'm not going to say no without more information. I generally whine and complain to make sure that I have everything that I need to have to make a decision. Levy increases, you know, I mean, this is the point I think that we've all sort of been dreading, but for some reason my daughter's calling me. The point where we've all been dreading, where Shorewood is an expensive place to live, right? You know, a levy increase of 8%, I think, you know, I'd have a hard time stomaching that. You know, is it the easiest route to get where we need to go? Yes, for sure. But you know, this village is, the residents have sustained years and years of tax and fee increases, not necessarily from the village, you know, and there's going to be a point where, you know, a few different things can happen. A tipping point where sort of the, you know, the juice isn't worth the squeeze to live here anymore. Like, it's just going to be too expensive to rent or too expensive to own. You know, we've got fees for this, we've got fees for that. Do I think we're there now? No. Do I think we could get there in a relatively quick amount of time? I sure do. But as far as what's on the table, you know, I mean, we've got money for affordable housing that's sitting out there that we haven't utilized. We've got, you know, parcels. I mean, I personally am strongly against the sale of the parking lot and, you know, behind this building. You know, recycling refuse charge. I use the composting. I've used it every year since it was available. I would continue to use it if we had extra charges. You know, we enjoy doing it. I get no benefit from, I don't even buy the compost that I compost, but I do it anyways because it's the right thing to do. Vehicle registration fee stinks. No one likes it. No one wants to do it, but you know, it may happen. Streetlight system replacement plan charge, that I could pretty easily get behind. That's a safety issue for me. You know, I've been a pretty strong advocate for the replacement since we first brought it up. I would have almost no problem getting behind that. people who walk their dogs need to be seen by drivers. You know, the kids out at night need to be seen. You know, for far too long, we've had too many dark streets in this village. Parking utility fund balance, I think that's a Band-Aid. You know, I don't think it might get us something in the short term. But you know, I don't think it's going to do anything for us in the long term. Delay capital equipment purchases, I'm with Trustee Arndorfer, and I imagine the rest of the board. If we have smart policies and it makes sense and we can extend the life of things, you know, it certainly is worth taking a look at. But, you know, I mean, it's Shorewood. I don't know. We talk a lot about affordability here in the village. You know, they're words, because the budgets we have to deal with moving forward are not going to be affordable budgets. You know, it's not going to be easy on the taxpayers, on renters, homeowners, businesses. It's going to be expensive to do business and to live in Shorewood. And that's the reality of the situation. And so, you know, I think we just need to be honest with ourselves and honest with the community, and, you know, let everyone know that this is what's coming. Because of underfunding from the state, because of just the rising costs. So to sum up, even though I didn't even want to speak in the beginning, there's nothing off the table for me, you know, except perhaps massive levy increases. Although I do respect and understand why folks would go that way. Everything else is fair game, you know, and it's about, like Trustee Lynn said, making sure that Shorewood is here 70 years from now, not just what is easy for us today. So it's not fun. I'm not going to enjoy it, but it's why we're here. So we'll get it done. That's it.
Thank you. Trustee Lynn?
I had one short thing. You know, one thing that I think kind of gets lost in a lot of these discussions when we're stuck in the weed is to say thank you to everybody who's paying taxes here. I mean, you know, when my wife and I were looking for a home, we really wanted to be in Shorewood, and we scraped together every penny we had to get into a house here in this community, because we know that there are people who are willing and able to pay for the things that we value as a community. And I mean, my house is less than the $340,000 average. So my 8% would be less than that $200. So for me, you know, I can do that $10 a month extra as in my property tax bill, which I already consider to be is my biggest charitable contribution that I make to anyone, anywhere, every year. You know, I love being able to participate in that. And, you know, I for one am just extremely grateful to get to live here in this community where people are willing and able to support all these things. It's a true luxury. I mean, I'd be amazed to find a community as small as ours that can fund as much as we do anywhere else in the world. It's just such a wonderful place to be, and to be a small community like this, and where everybody has a voice and everybody can participate. And the cost for that is that it's expensive to live here. And for me, that's the trade-off that I think is worth it. So I just want to say thank you, you know, to everybody who pays a tax bill here, because it really is it's just a gift. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Would you be more grateful if you paid mine as well?
I could pay 8% more, but I can't pay 100% more.
Just saying. We could add it.
Okay, I want to say a couple things. I agree with you know, basically everything that's been said tonight. I really want to say thank you to all the efforts that has been put into getting us to this conversation, and to my colleagues. This is the first experience I've had in my 10 years on the board where we are actually, like, we are forced to be looking. I've always had the luxury of just saying no to all these fees and things, and because we always had that cushion of the stabilization, or we didn't really have to do it. And we do have to do something. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to really look carefully and intentionally around these things. So that being said, I think that our main job is to provide the best quality services, core services, that are within being practical and reasonable. So we can't overlook the realities of things. We can't control the costs of things. What we can do is to be very data-driven and informed, and we can be honest. And so, to your point, letting people know what is at hand and what needs to be done, that these are not, we are talking about core services. We don't control the cost of those, and that there are lots of factors in play. And I think we're setting that all up to do a good job with all of that. I think that the other, so specifically, I do think that the fairest way to cover the costs of the services we deliver is through tax levy, just because it spreads it, over everyone. Fees are regressive in nature, and they don't prevent tax levy increases. They just mitigate tax levy increases. And so if we're not going to do fees and charges on the outside, we do have to levy more, because there are costs that have to be covered, and we have choices of how to cover them. And we're really, so anyway, I do think the most straightforward way, and also traditionally in Shorewood, we kept everything on the tax levy, and so that people knew what they were paying and they could deduct it. And Whitefish Bay had, quote unquote, a lower tax levy, but then they had private assessments. So you got charged if your street got reconstructed. You paid an assessment for that. They've now moved to keeping things on the levy because it is a more straightforward approach. So I'm not against levying to the extent that we can levy, because I do think that it is the most fair. I do think that said, the streetlight fee is very clear and I think easy to implement. I agree with what everyone said this evening around that. I think the wheel tax it's something that people understand, but it looks like we would be the first municipality within Milwaukee County to adopt one. So then people living in Milwaukee County and Shorewood would get like a double tax. And that seems excessive, so while it's a familiar tax, doubling up like that, I think is a tough one to defend. Let's see, I agree with the asset policy, because there's been a lot of disagreement in the boards that I've been on around like what's a reasonable approach to replacement. So I think relooking at that is a really good idea. The parking utility, it's true, it's a Band-Aid. It's a one-time fund that would maybe make it so we don't need an 8% increase, but it's sort of like debt stabilization. Like it's still kind of like, it's not showing the true cost of what it costs to receive these services and to have a high quality infrastructure that we're responsible for providing. That said, similar to Trustee Kudo, I really look forward to working this out, and everything's on the table at this point. And the one thing that I do want to just put out there and push back a little bit around is that all the talk about taxes and what it costs to live here is typically from the single family home owner viewpoint, and whether it's affordable for single family homeowners. And I just want to say that I've owned 2 homes in Shorewood of different sizes, went through a major life change, stayed in Shorewood, and chose to serve in local government. I rent my home now. It is affordable. It's very affordable. I was a recently divorced single mom with not full-time income and no work history. And I've been able to stay in Shorewood and stay involved in all of those things. And I think we have to remember that 50% of our population rents their homes to live here. And so there's a lot of ways to live and participate in Shorewood, and with creativity and innovation and this type of board, I think we can create even more ways. They're not mutually exclusive. So just to keep that in mind when family homeowners are really concerned about their tax increases. I mean, my rent will probably go up if we have an 8%, increase or fee charges or what have you. But that's just something to consider. So that's where I'll stop, and that's kind of the go around. So it wasn't really a lightning round, but it was a much more robust discussion or intentional discussion, thoughtful discussion than I anticipated anybody would be ready for tonight. And I really, really appreciate that. Any questions for us, Rebecca? Okay. With that, I would close this item and move on to that concludes new business for this evening. And so does that take us to reports or closed session? Okay, reports of village officials, Village President, North Shore Fire Department Board meeting, August 18th. The link is here. The proposed budget was presented to the fire board at the August meeting. I have asked that Chief Whitaker come and present that budget to us so that we all have time. I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm communicating to you about a budget under a report where we can't have discussion. I also am not technically, I understand the budget and I could speak to it as far as what was told to me, but I think you all have the right to ask questions of the chief. He's been informed of our budget situation and that we are watching, we're not looking to add staff. We're not adding anything. We're actually looking at how we can consolidate and streamline. So I just wanted to let you know that that's the conversation that's been taken. So I think he'll come at the 16th. And then I'll hear that discussion. The managers have provided input they've discussed the budget. And then the fire department board will take a vote on it in October. All right. But you can review the budget at this link. All right. Are there any village trustees? Are there any committee updates? Trustee Ursula.
Coming from the bid, we got the Shorewood Feast coming up, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. I'm excited for another great event. Still looking for volunteers to help out. So if anybody's interested.
I have tickets to a concert. I know I've been a steady.
Yeah,
but I gotta say.
That's right. You got to spread the love to other volunteers.
Ted Leo and
We
the
all
Pharmacist
know that is
yeah.
the best part of the feast is volunteering.
It is.
And-
I highly recommend it.
Yep.
I don't know, the food's pretty darn good.
It is. I get to eat everything.
Well,
I'll be honest with you.
Hey, secret,
volunteers
secret, you
get to
get to
eat.
sit in the back and eat the food anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just,
I
you
go
know,
home
so
stuffed. Okay,
yeah, so
Thanks.
that's all I got.
please do volunteer. It's a really, really great time. Yes.
Just wanted to ask, so you just mentioned that we weren't adding in a staff. I thought in middle of 2025, staff wanted to add a water utility.
Oh, well, maybe that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. And is there an open house or when do we get to go through the new fire station?
Dates have not yet been set. They're still actually moving in this week. So we will let you know.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll come through. Could it be part of a Friday update?
They're not in our village center at all anymore. The department is completely gone.
Correct.
All right, any committee liaison reports? All right, library board?
Haven't met.
Okay. That's odd.
No news is good news. Library's still there.
Village manager?
No report.
All right, we have no future items of consideration. I will take a motion to adjourn and to adjourn into closed session. And then we will come out of closed session and do a final adjournment afterwards. Motion to adjourn into closed session? Read the business.
The village board will consider moving into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute section 19.851E to deliberate or negotiate the purchasing of public properties where competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session to discuss prospective properties for the new DPW site.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Lynn, seconded by trustee McGovern. This will be a roll call vote.
Trustee Lynn,
Aye.
President McCaig,
Aye.
trustee Ursink,
Aye.
trustee McGovern,
Aye.
trustee Kudo, trustee Stokbrand,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer.
Aye.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right, we are now in closed session at 10:18.
So Russ, remember when I said I don't have a crystal ball, know when closed session's gonna happen? So
jogged here.
I think like 3 times I was like, nope, not until now. Was wrong on all of them.
That's all right. I'm very close, so.
Just gonna
I think we did.
pause this. We have no one else on the recording. So I'm gonna stop the video.